One night, I was at home relaxing in the living room. At the time, I lived in a pretty small house with a roommate. We were both renting it, and during this time, my roommate was not home. So I was by myself, and I recall that about 11 o'clock at night, I heard this strange noise. It was coming from the back side of the house, but I couldn't really tell what it was. I also couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. I stopped hearing it for a short time, so I just ignored it. But then I heard it again a few minutes later. It was really strange, so I got up and walked over to the back of the house. It was very dark out, and the windows were covered. I took a quick look outside into the backyard, but didn't see anything. I couldn't quite tell if the sound was coming from outside or from the basement. I didn't really want to go down in the basement, but I felt like I had to. So I walked over and went down the stairs. This basement was not finished, and we never used it. When I walked down there, I didn't see anything, but I still heard the noise. I walked over to where it was coming from. When I made it nearby, I looked up, and there was the egress window in the basement. A man was right on the other side of it. When I saw him, I'm pretty sure that I jumped back about a foot. I really was not expecting to see him there. He saw me at about the same time, and then he started climbing back out of the window area and into the backyard. I had no idea what to do for a moment. Then I got out my phone and called the police. The man was gone, and I looked at the window, and it appeared somewhat damaged. The sounds that I heard must have been him trying to pry it open or something. I went back upstairs, and when the police got there, the man was long gone. I was unable to give a very good description of the guy because I only saw him for like a second, and I don't really remember what he looked like, sadly. The police told me though that there had been some break-ins in the area. After that, they left. I was nervous that the guy would return, but he did not. I only lived in that house for a year, and that was by far the craziest thing to happen. I'm not sure why the man wanted to break into our house specifically. Maybe he just liked to break into random houses. I'm guessing he also did the other robberies in the area. I also realized that I didn't see him when I looked into the backyard because the place that he was in was out of my sight from there. I'm just glad that when he saw me there in the basement, he left. This is something that happened back in the year 2003. I'm a female and was 23 years old at the time. I had just recently joined a bowling league because I have always enjoyed bowling. I was okay, but after the first time bowling with the team, I realized that I needed more practice. So there was this kind of small bowling alley pretty close to where I lived. I remember that one night, I asked a few friends if they wanted to go with me, but they were not able to. Instead of not going, I decided to bowl by myself to get the practice. So that night, I went to the alley. It was not that busy, and like I said, the place was kind of small and also old. I got the lane on the very far right end of the alley, which was nice because it felt more private. I set my stuff on one of the several chairs they had right in front of the lanes. Nobody was bowling at any of probably the next 5 lanes to my left. So I bowled a few games and was getting some good practice in. I had been there for almost an hour when I turned around after bowling one time and suddenly realized that there was a man sitting at my lane. He was in one of the seats not far away from my stuff at all. The man was sort of large, was bald, and had a goatee, and from just his chin, the hair was really long. He also had several tattoos. I did not know where he had come from. He appeared to just be watching me bowl. I thought that maybe he would say something to me, but he did not. He just kept sitting there, so I just kept bowling. It was awkward to say the least, but I only had several more frames before I was done, and then I would be leaving. The man just kept sitting there the entire time. I thought about saying something to him, like asking him what he was doing, but I didn't. So before long, I was done bowling. I went and sat in a seat just 2 away from him and changed out of my bowling shoes. Then I got my stuff. In that entire time, the man still did not say anything. After that, I went up to return the bowling shoes. The man did not get up when I did. After I had returned the shoes, I looked back to the lane that I bowled at, and the man was now gone. I figured that he left, and then I headed for the exit. There was a parking lot on the side of the building, which is where I had parked. I walked over to the side door, and there were 2 sets of doors. When I went through the first one, I noticed the man was standing in the small area between the next set of doors. I got a bad feeling when I saw him. I walked past and then out the doors and into the parking lot. Moments later, I heard the door open again. I knew that the man was now leaving, and I wondered if he was following me. There were several cars scattered around the parking lot. It was not well lit and pretty dark outside. The town was pretty quiet as well, but there were some other places nearby. So as I was walking to my car, I heard footsteps behind me, and they sounded somewhat fast. I was going to my vehicle, but I just had a bad feeling about it. Just going with my instincts, I changed directions and did not go to my car anymore. I walked more towards the front of the parking lot where there was a sidewalk. When I turned, I heard the guy turning behind me. I walked to the sidewalk and then started going down it. I didn't know where I was going at first, but I saw that this bar was open just down the street, so I started heading in that direction. The man behind me followed the entire way. However, luckily he did not catch up to me, but maintained a distance. It was very obvious that he was following me though, so I kept going down the sidewalk and was able to make it to the bar. I had only been there once before, so I didn't know it that well, and I didn't know anybody inside. But I went inside and there were a good number of other people around, so I felt safer. The man went inside as well though. I stood around near the bar, and the man stood at the other end of it. I then walked towards the bathrooms. I was going to go into the women's restroom and call one of my friends. Luckily, I did have my cell phone with me. However, when I reached the hallway where the restrooms were, I noticed that they had a back exit, so I decided to just leave through there. The man would not notice because he couldn't see from where he was, and probably assumed that I just went to use the restroom. I left and then literally ran all the way back to my car. Luckily, I was able to make it. I then drove home and made it back okay. I still feel to this day that I avoided possibly a terrible situation. I don't know who that guy was, but I know for a fact that he was following me. I went to that same bowling alley several more times and never saw him there again. I used to be a pizza delivery driver. It was a job that I had for about a year when I was younger. The pizza place that I worked for was pretty good. I enjoyed working there. I remember that we had this one customer though that got banned from ordering from us. He would often call and order pizzas to his house. Then he would act really creepy or rude to the delivery drivers. 3 different ones had all reported him, sometimes multiple occasions. So our manager ended up banning him, and there was literally a note on the wall saying not to accept his order, because he would try calling and ordering, or ordering online, and we wouldn't let him. A couple of times after he was banned, some of his orders got through because we had forgotten, and that led to more complaints. I personally never had to deliver to him, but I heard from the other drivers that he was just not nice at all. I guess he cursed out one of the delivery drivers for no apparent reason once. Another time, he called one of the drivers a curse word, and then another time he tried to get one of the delivery drivers to enter his house, and when they said no, he literally tried to pull her inside. We ended up getting a new manager hired though, who was part-time. His name was Andy, and overall he was cool, but kinda bossy. One time when I was working as a delivery driver, he gave me a pizza and an address and told me to deliver it. I immediately recognized it as the banned address. I took it up with Andy, and I told him how the guy was banned and we weren't supposed to deliver there. Andy said that he had already took the order. He said, "Look buddy, just do one more delivery there for me." So it was apparent that I had to go, so I took the pizza and then left. I was kinda mad at Andy, but I was also curious how the creepy man would act. I figured maybe I could just give him the pizza, get the money, and leave without a problem. How hard could it be? If he wanted to yell stuff at me for whatever reason, he could go right ahead. I didn't really care. I didn't know if the guy was just a grouch or if he enjoyed being rude to people or what. Eventually, I arrived. He lived in what looked like a pretty typical neighborhood. I took the pizza, got out of the car, and then walked up to the front step. Before I even reached it though, the guy opened his front door and was looking at me. He looked to be in his 50s or so, had dark sort of long hair and a handlebar mustache. He also had an open can of Miller Lite in his hand. "Who the F are you?" he called out as I was walking up. I said, "I'm the pizza delivery driver delivering the pizza that you ordered, sir." He then told me to just give him the pizza already and shut up. So I walked up to him and handed him the pizza. I could smell the strong smell of beer as well as cigarettes coming from inside the house. I told him the price, and the guy said, "You expect me to pay for this crap?" That's when I got worried that I wasn't going to get out of there with any money. I told him, "Yes, I need the money." The man then said that he had the money inside his house, and I could go and get it if I was brave enough. I thought about it for a moment and thought, no, I don't think I am. But then I realized that I really needed to get the money or Andy would get mad at me. So I tried to do a compromise and I asked the man to go get the money for me. He said no. Then I reluctantly said that I would go get it. The man stepped back and I entered the house. It was very cluttered. There were boxes and beer cans everywhere. I stayed just inside of the door. The man then said that the money was in the basement. At that point I thought, heck no, and I turned around and just walked out. The man started saying something, but I didn't even care. I ran out of his yard and back for my car. He was yelling at me the whole time. I got in my car, left, and drove back to work. When I arrived back, I was furious with Andy. I told him that the guy was totally insane and we never should have took the order. Andy asked for the money, and I said how the guy didn't pay. Andy started to give me some kind of new employee orientation lecture about how I have to make sure I get money from the customers or the business will lose money. That really ticked me off. I literally started yelling at Andy that the guy was trying to get me to go into his basement. It got heated for a moment, but Andy ended up understanding, and after a conversation, he was cool about it in the end. After that, we never delivered to that guy again. This happened when I was in high school. It was the summertime, and I think that I was about 15 or so. So I was home alone because both my parents had work, and my older sister also worked. I was too young to have a job, so I just stayed home and played video games on most days. That's what I was doing on one morning when I heard a knock on the front door. I never liked to answer the door. I didn't know who it was, but I figured it to be a salesman or something. I didn't even bother to get up. Whoever was at the door knocked again one more time. I just ignored it and kept playing video games. I hoped that they would go away, and after that second time, they stopped knocking. I figured that they were gone, so I never left my bedroom. So I continued gaming, and I quickly forgot about it. It was maybe 1 or 2 hours later when I heard a knocking at the front door again. I figured that the same person was back, but I still didn't know who it was. This time, though, I figured that I better get up and see. Plus, I was curious if they were going to be knocking on the door multiple times a day. So I left my bedroom and I walked over towards the door. I saw some random guy standing there, and I had no idea who he was, but I still didn't want to answer the door. He didn't seem to notice me, so I quickly went away. I went back to my bedroom and then just hoped that the guy would realize nobody was going to answer the door. I didn't know what he wanted, but I didn't really care either. The knocking stopped, and I figured that he was gone again. Moments later, the home phone rang. I didn't know if it would be my parents or something, so I got up to answer it. When I arrived at the phone, I picked it up and said hello. I heard a man's voice on the other end who I did not recognize. He said, "Answer the door," and then he hung up. I was really freaked out now. I went over to a window and looked out and saw that that same man was still standing there. I figured he had to be the one who just called. This was really strange, but it didn't make me want to answer the door anymore. In fact, it made me want to answer the door even less. A lot less. I went back into my bedroom and tried to just ignore it all. After that, I didn't hear any more knocking. Sometime later, I got up and checked out the window again, and the guy was not there anymore. I was glad that he was gone and hoped that he wouldn't come back. For the rest of that day, there was no more knocking. Soon my sister and parents got home from their jobs. I remember that later that night, my parents and I were in the living room. My dad noticed out the window there was a car parked on the side of the street. It was across the street, but sort of in front of our house. It was really rare to see cars parked on the street like that in our neighborhood. My dad said to my mom how it was strange. Then I remembered everything that happened, and I told my parents about it. My dad decided to go and see the car. All the lights were off, and we couldn't tell if anybody was inside of it, but I think we all figured that it was vacant. So my dad left the house and went outside. When he did, he had made it no more than 10 steps into the yard when the car suddenly started up. Then it quickly pulled away, driving off. It was definitely very suspicious, all right. After that, there was never any more knocking on the door when I was home alone. This is something that happened not too long ago. I go to Chipotle all the time, and it's one of my favorite restaurants. There are also several locations that are pretty close to where I live. So most of the time when I get it, I order on the app and then I just stop by and pick it up. Every time it's just waiting in the bag on the shelf inside the restaurant. I also get points on the app and then I end up getting free stuff. Many times I get it on my way back from work or the gym when I'm starving. This is a routine that I've done pretty regularly for probably over a year. One time a few months ago, I ordered Chipotle on my way home from work like many other times. By the time I arrived at the Chipotle, I went inside and my order was done and on the shelf. I picked it up and left. Then I drove the rest of the way back home. After getting back to my apartment, I took the food out of the bag, but I noticed something else. There was an SD card that was inside the bag as well. It was like a random SD card that goes in a camera and you can connect it to your computer. I thought that maybe it was a mistake, but then I realized, how could that be possible? Somebody had to have put it in there on purpose. You don't just accidentally drop an SD card into a bag of Chipotle. I was curious, but I was also a little weirded out by this. After thinking about it for a few minutes, I decided to put the SD card in my computer. I was just too curious. Sure, I was a little worried that it might be a virus and break my computer or hack all my information, but ultimately I did it anyways. After entering the SD card in my computer, there was just one folder that was titled Folder. So I double-clicked it and it opened several images. I think it was maybe like 5 pictures. Each picture was what looked like a man wearing this really creepy mask on his face. The mask covered his entire head, and the face of the mask had wide eyes and very white skin. It also had these creepy looking teeth. And the photos were taken with a flash in a very dark room, so I couldn't tell any other details at all. And I'm not going to lie, I was pretty creeped out. However, I figured that it was maybe just a prank. But why me? Why would somebody deliberately put this in my bag? Maybe it was random. Maybe somebody just walked up to one of the to-go orders and put it in the bag. Or maybe it was a Chipotle employee trying to be funny. The thought also occurred to me that possibly they did know who I was because I went there so often. I was considering all the possibilities, but ultimately I had no way to really find out. I wasn't going to go back to the Chipotle and investigate and interrogate the employees or anything like that, so I decided to just not go back to that Chipotle for a little while. But the story doesn't end there. It was just a few days after this when I was at home one night. It was maybe 10 o'clock and I was in my bedroom watching a show on my TV. I also live alone and have a one-bedroom place on the second floor of the building. Out of nowhere, there was a knock on the front door to my apartment. This was really strange because nothing like that had ever happened before, and I obviously was not expecting anyone. I got up and walked over to the front door out of curiosity. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a man standing there wearing that same creepy mask. He was looking right at the door. When I saw him, I'm pretty sure that I jumped back about 5 feet. In the moment, I had forgotten about the SD card and stuff, but my memory was quickly jogged. I realized that this was the same person. After a few seconds, I went back over to the door to look again. He was still there, not moving, just standing there facing the door and seemingly looking at me. He stayed there for what felt like a really long time. Then he turned and quickly walked away. I was really creeped out by the whole situation. How did he know where I lived? I didn't know what to do about it, but I told all my friends. Some of them told me to call the police, and some said that I should report it to the Chipotle. Others thought that it was funny. I didn't do anything about it though. I figured he didn't do anything illegal and it would be pretty hard to prove to the Chipotle. Plus, what would they even do about it? Overall, it was just a really bizarre thing. For the next few days, I was nervous that the guy would come back, but he never did. I stayed away from that Chipotle and went to a different one for a while. That was like 6 months ago. I've since gone back a few times and nothing strange has happened. This still remains a mystery to me though. In my early childhood, I would spend nearly every day riding my bike. It was a normal summer afternoon when I went out with my friend once when I was 8 years old. We pedaled around the neighborhood racing each other and stopping for snacks. After a couple of hours, my friend had to go home. I still had some time, so I decided to ride on my own. I took a route that went through a quiet area where the trees lined the streets and the houses were spaced apart. It felt peaceful at first, but soon I noticed a white Volkswagen not far behind me. I didn't think much of it initially. Cars passed by all the time, and I figured it was just another driver out for a leisurely afternoon. But as I continued, I realized that the car was following me. I took a left turn, then a right, trying to shake it off, but the Volkswagen stayed close. I remembered what my dad had taught me about safety and what to do if I felt threatened. I pushed my bike harder, trying to distance myself from the car. Then it stopped beside me. A man stepped out. He was hairy with a scruffy beard and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in days. He smelled really bad, but I remembered that I didn't want to be rude, so I didn't cover my nose. He stood a bit away from me on the curb and crouched down to my level height and asked if I was okay. I nodded, saying I was fine and just biking, keeping my eyes on him, trying to gauge his intentions. The man went on to say that he was a friend of my parents, and they had told him to find me and drive me to my grandma's house. My grandma had been dead for 5 years now, and I knew that he wasn't who he said he was. I'm not sure if I would have believed him anyways at that age, because I didn't think my parents could possibly be friends with someone who smelled that bad. I called him a liar and then started pedaling again as hard as I could. As I started leaving, the man reached out to try to grab my arm, but I had already put enough distance from him to avoid his grasp. I rode straight home, not checking to see if the car was following me still or not. The only thing I could think about was the man and what could have happened if I hadn't escaped. When I finally burst through the front door, my parents were in the living room. I was shaking and crying as I told them everything. My parents called the police, describing the type of car that I had described. Miraculously, on their way to my house, they passed the white car that had been following me and arrested the smelly guy who was driving. Then they arrived at my house, and after my verification that that was the guy that tried to grab me, the police left with the man. I had no idea what ended up happening to him and what his consequence was. I think my parents knew, but since I was pretty young, they told me to not worry about it and that I would be safe. It was scary when it happened, but looking back, it felt good that the guy had ended up being caught. I'm an Amazon delivery driver and have been for a little over a year. I drive one of the Amazon trucks and deliver to several neighborhoods in a particular city. I deliver to both houses and apartments, and overall I enjoy it. Things are usually pretty easy because I don't have to drive on some of the very narrow roads. Anyways, the story I want to talk about happened roughly 6 months ago. So I'd been on the job for about 6 months and had gotten used to most things. There was this one neighborhood that I had been delivering to on many days. I would describe it as a very typical neighborhood. There were houses on both sides of the street with nice front yards and driveways. I would park on the side of the road and deliver to the houses and slowly make my ways down. On most days, I would say at least 10 of the houses had Amazon packages to be delivered. Some houses would obviously get packages almost every day. So one day, I got about halfway down the street and I parked my truck to deliver to one house in particular. When I got out of the truck, I went to walk up the driveway and leave the package at the front step. I knew that I had delivered to this house several times before and I recognized it. As I was walking up the driveway, I saw this man standing in the garage next to the house. The garage door was open and there was also a car inside. The man was watching me and I thought about going and handing him the package. However, as I continued to walk up the driveway, he looked away and then he walked farther into the garage and kind of out of sight. Then I just went to the front step, set the package down, and then headed back to my truck. I remember when I was getting back to my truck, I saw the guy staring at me again. I didn't really think too much of this whole thing, but I mentioned that because something strange happened soon after. I remember that I continued with my route for the day. I was out delivering packages, and when I got off, I drove the truck back to the Amazon warehouse. After parking the truck, I went inside, and a short time later, I headed out to my car to drive home. When I got inside my car in the parking lot though, I saw this other car parked a ways across from me. I don't know how I noticed this, because the car's lights were off, and it wasn't like directly in front of me or anything. But I saw that there was a man in the driver's seat of the car, and he was looking at me. I was sure that it was the same guy who I had seen in the garage. It took me like 5 seconds to remember that. When I saw him, I knew he looked familiar, but I couldn't tell from what. Then I realized. I was very confused though as to why he would be there. I sat in my car for a short time, wanting to see what the guy was doing. He appeared to just be sitting in his car. I couldn't really tell if he was looking over at me, but it kinda seemed like it. After I sat there for like 2 or 3 minutes, I remember seeing the lights to his car suddenly turn on, and then he drove away. I was a little creeped out by this. Then I just drove home though. I didn't know what else to do. Now, for a few days, I did not deliver to that house. Then, probably 3 days later, I did have another delivery there. I left my truck and started walking up the driveway again. This time the garage door was closed and I did not see the man staring at me or anything. But when I got to the front door, there was a note taped to it. The note said, "Please deliver package inside the house." I didn't really know if I should, but after thinking for a few seconds, I decided to. I thought that maybe they had had a problem with people stealing packages or something, and if this one got stolen, I might get in trouble for not delivering it even though I had. I don't really know, but that's what I was thinking at the time. I opened the door and it was unlocked. It looked like a pretty typical entryway of a house. But then I saw another note taped to a wall straight inside the house. This one said, "Deliver package that way," with an arrow pointing to the right. This was just too weird. I just laid the package down right inside the door and then turned around and left. I went back to my truck and continued on. After that, I didn't get any more package deliveries to that house. But something else that's weird is I would still drive down that street for other deliveries. Like a week or so after the incident, I remember seeing 2 police cars parked on the side of the road in front of that house. I'm not sure what it was about, but I think that guy seemed really sketchy. Like 2 weeks later, my route changed. I haven't been back there since. I'm not sure what the deal was with that guy, but he certainly gave me the creeps. I had been driving for hours on a rural highway close to sunset when suddenly my car broke down. My phone had no signal and I was far out from any town. My car had started sputtering down the road and then it eventually died completely. I was now on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. I tried restarting the engine a few times, but nothing happened. At this point, I was really tired and frustrated. I got out and popped the hood, but I wasn't much of a mechanic, so I didn't really know what to look for. Some smoke was rising from the engine, but that was about it. I had no idea what was wrong. I thought about just walking to the nearest town, but I had no idea how far it was. Just a bit earlier on the road, I had passed by a small road that led into a driveway a few miles back. I hoped there might be a house or some sort of help down that driveway. I grabbed a flashlight from the trunk and started walking. The light from the setting sun quickly faded. I finally arrived at the small drive, and when I got there, I reached a small old house. It was barely visible, hidden behind a bunch of trees. The house appeared to be unkempt, and there was peeling paint and broken windows. The yard was also overgrown, and the whole place had an abandoned look. I was a bit skeptical of the house, and not sure if anybody even lived there. I decided to go there anyways, though. When I knocked on the door, there was no answer at first, so I knocked again and waited. The door was sitting open a few inches, though, so I pushed it open and took a few careful steps inside to see if anybody was around. The inside was dark and smelled musty, and the only light coming in was from an old flickering lamp on a table. I was thinking that this was really weird, but I was desperate for some help and just hoped that somebody lived there. I heard a noise coming from the back of the house. It sounded like footsteps. I was nervous, but I called out, "Hello? Is anybody there? My car broke down and I was just wondering if you could help me." There was no response. Whoever had been walking around had stopped, and I decided to leave due to the awkwardness of the situation and the fact that I was actually intruding a bit. I hadn't heard it happen, but somehow the door had shut behind me, so when I went to leave, I tried to pull the handle, but it was locked. I started to panic. I noticed a small window near the ceiling, but it was too high to reach. I looked around for something to break the door open, but I saw nothing useful near me, and I wasn't going to venture further into the darkness of the house. As I was trying to find another way out, I heard a voice from behind me. It was a low, raspy whisper that said, "What are you doing here?" I spun around, but there was nobody there. My heart was racing, and I felt like I was about to faint. I kept trying the door, hoping that it would open, but it remained locked. I couldn't figure out how to unlock it either. It was like it was locked from the other side. Suddenly, I heard the footsteps again, but they were right behind me. I turned around slowly, and this time, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was hard to make out any details, but it looked like a person. The figure moved closer, and I could see that it was a man. His face was obscured by a hood, though. I backed away, but he didn't seem to be in a hurry. He just stared at me, and the silence was deafening. I tried to reason with him again, saying, "I'm sorry, I just needed help with my car." Once again, no response from the guy, as he just stood there. I realized I had to do something before he came any closer. Grabbing a heavy vase from the small table, I threw it at the figure, hoping to distract him. The vase shattered, and the figure hesitated for a moment before moving towards me. In a burst of adrenaline, I managed to somehow force the door open. I bolted outside, running through the overgrown yard and not stopping until I reached the road. My car was still there, but it was getting darker, and I felt completely alone. I walked back to where the car had broken down, hoping to flag down any passing car. I sat in my car with the doors locked for almost 3 hours waiting for a car to drive by on the lonely rural highway. Thankfully, the man from the house didn't follow me out to my car. When I finally saw the headlights of another car coming down the road, I got out with the flashlight and flagged them down. The driver was a nice man who offered to drive me to the next town. He dropped me off with no incident, and I finally had service there to call a tow truck and put an end to my horrible night that I was having. I realized the cabin looked sketchy, and it wasn't the greatest idea to enter it uninvited, but I was panicking about my broken down car and trying to get help before darkness came. I hope that I never have to go through anything like that again. When I was in high school during my junior year, I took a running class. It was a gym class, and we would do all kinds of running and jogging exercises. The class was overall pretty easy. I remember that the weather was pretty nice for most of the semester, so we would go outside a lot. One day in particular, our teacher took us across the street from the school and down the street a ways to a local park. It was a place that had jogging trails and a very large woods. At the time of the class, which was the morning, the park was very quiet and hardly anybody was there. Along with the teacher, we were supposed to jog around the trail for basically the entire class period. I remember that the teacher led the way and we all started jogging behind him. In the class with me was one of my good friends, David. We always talked during class and would jog together for most of the runs that we would go on. I remember that him and I were talking and we were at the very far back of the group. We didn't feel like trying hard that day and just wanted to take a nice, easy jog at the back. Because we were going so slow, I remember that I was kind of looking around at the scenery as well. A good ways into the run, and we approached this spot in the trail that had really thick woods. As we were running through this spot, I noticed something off the trail and into the woods. There was something black on the ground that did not look natural, such as a rock or a plant. It was very out of place being in nature, and at first I figured that it was just trash, like a box or something. But after jogging a few steps and not knowing what it was, I stopped. David saw that I was looking at something and asked what it was. We both walked into the woods a little bit to the spot to get closer. The item in question was about 25 feet or so off the path and partly obstructed by the leaves and plants on the ground. The woods were pretty dense, but when we got closer, I couldn't believe my eyes. There was a PlayStation 4 sitting there, and this is when they were the newest gaming system and were somewhat hard to get. David said, "Is that really a PS4? We went to get closer. However, when we were maybe 5 feet away, we heard the sound of movement to our left. We looked over and there was this guy standing about 20 feet away from us next to a tree and looked somewhat disheveled. The man shouted, 'Get away from me,' and then started to charge towards us. Both of us just turned and ran out of there. We got back to the path and then sprinted to catch back up with the rest of the class. Neither of us knew who the man was, obviously, or what he was doing in the woods. Did he live in the woods? Was that his PS4? Why was there a PS4 there? Those were the questions that were racing through my mind as I jogged the rest of the way. We finished up the class, and then we went through the rest of the school day. I couldn't stop thinking about the PlayStation 4 just sitting there in the woods, though. I didn't have one myself yet, and I obviously wanted one. After school, I met up with David again, and we both agreed to go back to the woods. We wanted to see if the PS4 was still there and if the man was gone. We were both a little bit nervous because the guy seemed like he might be dangerous, but it was worth the risk to us. David and I entered the park and then jogged back to the spot where we had seen the PS4. Sure enough, it was still there. We looked around and did not see the man, so we both entered the woods again. We went off the path and we approached the PlayStation. It was just sitting there on the ground by itself. There were no controllers or plugs hooked up to it. It was just the console alone. David and I picked it up and were about to leave when we heard a voice shout from behind us again. It was the same man with the beard. He screamed at us to stop. Then he demanded us to give him back his PlayStation. He looked terrifying, and so we did what he said. David set the PlayStation back down on the ground, and the man just stood there like 10 feet away from us. Then the man yelled at us to leave. We turned and sprinted out of there. Then we ran all the way back to the school and went home. It was a terrifying experience, and I wondered why the man who was seemingly living in the woods had a PlayStation 4. I mean, how would he use it? There was no TV in the woods that I saw, and where did he get it? It just seemed really weird. Well, later on, I got some answers. I found out that the PlayStation 4 had actually belonged to a kid that was in my grade. Apparently, the PlayStation broke, and he was really mad about it, so he took it out to the woods and chucked it. That's why there were no controllers or anything else there. It was in fact broken, so even if we had gotten it, it wouldn't have worked. Who the man was and what he was doing in the woods, though, I never found out. This happened over a decade ago when I was 12 years old. I live in a small town in Oklahoma, and in my neighborhood the houses are fairly spread apart, separated by woods. It was a school day, so my grandma picked me up from school and brought me home. This was the first year that I got dropped off at my house alone. Before this, I would just go to my grandma's house after school. My grandma would drop me off at around 3 p.m. and my parents would be home around 4:30 p.m. Not that big of a deal. Today, for some reason, my dad wasn't going to be home until later, and my mom, a teacher, wouldn't be home until around 8 p.m. because she had parent-teacher conferences at the school. This happened in early fall, so it wouldn't even get dark until like 8:30 p.m. I did what I usually did when I got home. I ran upstairs, got my Xbox 360, and played Minecraft with my friends. That day, it was just me and my friend Seth. I was playing for about 2 hours when I heard a car door shut in my driveway. Nobody should have been home there until about 7 p.m. My house is set up to where the upstairs has windows that look over my driveway. So with my mic on and controller in hand, I went to the window to see who it was. Maybe my dad got home earlier than expected. I looked outside. It was a red truck. Nobody that I knew drove a red truck. The person pulled into the middle of my driveway sideways like he owned the place. When I looked out of the window, I saw a man with a hat, wearing a big camo hoodie and jeans. It was September, so nobody should have been wearing a big hoodie and jeans in Oklahoma. By the time I looked, he was already almost out of view, going up my walkway to the front door. I thought that maybe it was one of my dad's friends, or somebody who my dad hired to do something, but he would usually tell me if somebody was going to be coming over. Soon after, I heard a knock at the door. I went to my other window that had a better view of the walkway up to the front door. I saw the guy walking back down the walkway. I switched to looking through the windows overlooking my driveway. I was relaying all of this to Seth with my mic still on. The man walked past his truck and tried to open my garage side door. At that point, my heart sank. I told Seth that this guy tried to get into my house. Mind you, it was literally broad day at like 5 p.m. Luckily, the garage side door was locked because sometimes we forgot to lock it. After he tried the door, he started walking to my back patio. I dropped my headset and I quietly ran downstairs to see what he was doing. I got downstairs and stood behind the wall, so I wouldn't be visible to the back door or living room windows. I just listened. I heard him trying to open the door. Then I heard a thud. It sounded like he dropped a brick on the ground or something. At this point, I was more scared than I had ever been. I wanted to call my parents or grandma, but I didn't have a cell phone yet. The only phone in the house was in my kitchen. I would have to cross the living room to get there, and he would be able to see me if I went into there. A few seconds after the thud, I peeked around the corner, and he was gone. I ran back upstairs and put my headset back on, telling Seth that he just tried to open the back door as well. As I was telling him this, I heard a car door shut. This time when I looked out the window, he finally got back into his truck. I looked at the truck closer and noticed the only things he had in his truck were a crowbar and a shovel. He sat in his truck for what felt like a few minutes. During this time, Seth told me to get my iPod and take a picture of his license plate, but he was parked where I couldn't see it. Then he drove backwards out of my driveway and down the road. A few minutes after he was confirmed gone, I went downstairs to see what the thud could have been. I got to the back door and saw that the doormat was moved. Both large plant pots had been moved as well. He was looking for a key, and we did have a hidden key back there too. The key to the back door was under one of the smaller plant pots on a ledge near the door, not the bigger ones that he had checked under. I went to the front porch, and all those pots looked like they had been moved too. I don't know what I could have done if he was able to find the key or if he just broke in. After he left, I called my dad and told him what happened. When my dad got home, he had a cop come over and I told him what happened and gave him a description. The guy never came back. When I was about 8 years old, I remember that I took a train one time with my older sister. She would have been 15, I think, and we were going to visit our grandparents. It was just us two, and we were just going for the weekend. Our grandparents lived a few hours away, but there was a train route that went from our city to theirs. My sister and I liked trains, so we wanted to take the train there, and our parents agreed. I remember that we first got to the train station in our city, and it was pretty busy there. Soon we boarded the train and got into our seats. The ride was pretty smooth, and we sat by the windows and watched things go by. I would say that the train was almost completely full with passengers. When we arrived in our grandparents' city, we got off the train along with most of the other people. Some of them were staying to go to the next stop though. So my sister and I walked into the train station, and I guess our grandparents were not there yet to pick us up. As we waited, my sister said that she was going to use the restroom. I didn't have to go, so my sister walked off and I kept standing there. I looked around the station, and it was very busy with lots of other people around. After about 2 minutes or so, I remembered that this woman approached me. I didn't know who she was, but she pointed out to the train and said that my sister was boarding it. I figured that we had to go back on the train, and this wasn't our stop, so I started to walk over. The woman then went with me to the train, and we both started to get back on. Now, to this point, I had just kind of been following my sister. I was young, and I didn't know exactly which stop was ours or which city we were even in. I just figured that I hadn't seen my sister after she had come out of the bathroom. So I actually got back onto the train and then went back to my seat, but I didn't see my sister there. I was confused, so at that point, I started looking around the train, thinking maybe she switched seats. The woman who was with me was sitting in the next row over. I didn't ask her where exactly my sister had gone or anything. Instead, I was just silently looking around. After about a minute, I actually saw my sister. She was walking just outside of the station and seemed to be looking around, probably for me. I got up and started to walk for the doors of the train. When I stood, the woman also stood up and asked me where I was going. I told her that my sister was not on the train, and I started walking away. The woman did not say anything back to me. She also didn't go after me or anything. I left the train and then walked over to my sister. I was very confused at this point, but when I reached my sister, she asked me what on earth I was doing back on the train. I told her how the lady told me she had been on, and I figured that we had to take the train to another city. My sister told me that we were in the city that our grandparents lived in, and she didn't know what that lady was talking about. I realized at that point that I may have avoided something bad. The train left a very short time after that, and we got picked up by my grandparents. Looking back at that, I'm really glad that I saw my sister and got off the train when I did. I used to work at a Chipotle several years ago. I didn't really work there for that long, just a few months, but it was long enough for something really crazy to happen. So I was working one night until close, which was 10 p.m. The Chipotle that I worked at was sort of in the middle of a huge shopping area. There were many stores like Target, Walmart, Costco, and others within a mile radius. There was also all the restaurants and smaller stores you could imagine as well, and sort of in the middle of this was the Chipotle. So things got pretty quiet at Chipotle at around 8 or 9 p.m. For the final hour, things really dragged on. Hardly anybody came in to order, so we started doing some cleaning. I went out and started to sweep the dining room area and clean the tables and stuff. By that point, there was just a few of us employees still there, and no customers sitting around. As I was sweeping towards the front of the store, I remember that I saw something weird. This guy came running into the parking lot at like a full sprint. He went right through it and then disappeared past the building. I only saw him for like a second because he was really flying. It seemed really weird, but I just kept working. We closed maybe 15 minutes later, and then soon after, I got off. I left the Chipotle and walked out to my car in the parking lot and got inside. My coworkers left as well, but I stayed in my car and was texting and Snapchatting some friends before I drove home. However, I was interrupted when I remember seeing something out of the corner of my eye in the mirror. I saw the running man again. He was sprinting into the parking lot once more, this time from another angle. However, as he approached my car, he slowed down to a jog. Then he went to my passenger's side door and stopped. He knocked on the window, and for some reason, I rolled it down a crack. I guess I was just curious as to what he wanted and why he was running around. The man was out of breath, and he asked if I could give him a ride. I had no idea who he was, and sprinting around like that was pretty weird, so I didn't want to. I said no, I couldn't. The guy then practically started begging me. He said he really needed just a quick ride and promised that it wouldn't be very far. I asked him where he was going. He started looking around and just said up the road. It seemed really sketchy. Then, without me even answering, the guy just gave a frustrated scoff and then frantically left. He ran away, sprinting out of the parking lot again. At that point, I figured that I should get out of there and drive home before he changed his mind and ran back or something. So I left the Chipotle and started heading home. On my way back when I was on the road, I noticed about 5 police cars with flashing lights driving on the other side of the road. They were heading towards where I had come from. I didn't know what it was, but I didn't put 2 and 2 together yet. The next morning, though, I saw it on the news. One of the businesses in that same general shopping area had been robbed at gunpoint by a man. It was the same man who I had seen running. He stole a bunch of cash, and it was less than a mile from the Chipotle. Then he ran off. I guess he also attempted a carjacking, which did not work out. He ended up being caught about a mile from the shopping center later that night in a nearby woods. I realized that I had probably seen him running from the scene of the crime, and if I had agreed to give him a ride, who knows what could have happened. I wasn't really that scared in the moment when it happened, but after the fact, it seemed a lot scarier. When my brother and I were around 12 years old, in like 2006, we were at my dad and stepmom's house in the afternoon, probably around 3 p.m., so still broad daylight. My brother and I were the only 2 people home because my dad, stepmom, and younger siblings were in a nearby town for their youth soccer game. The 2 of us were lounging in my dad's room, which was located at the back of the house, and watching a movie when we heard a knock on the front door. My brother and I grew up with our single mom, and we were latchkey kids. So being home alone and having people stop by wasn't concerning or weird for us, especially back in those days where it was more common for friends to drop by your house to see if you were home, since not every kid had a cell phone to keep in touch. But on this day, we were at my dad's house like I said, and I didn't know anybody in the neighborhood, so the knock on the door was weird since none of our friends or relatives lived nearby to come over randomly. Both of us wanted to ignore the knocking and wait for the person to go away. But being latchkey kids in a house where it wasn't normal for people to stop by unexpectedly, my instinct was to go and make sure that the door was locked. We knew better than to go out and make our presence known, and we for sure were not going to open the door. But in my mind, there was no getting around one of us going to make sure nothing was unlocked. I knew my brother, and I could tell that he wasn't going to do it, so I volunteered because it was an overwhelming priority. I got up and stealthily creeped down the hallway leading from my dad's room to the front door. There was a window next to the door, so I crouched around and very carefully peeked between the blinds before I reached out, twisting the door lock as silently as I could. It had been unlocked, so I'm very glad that I went to check. When I was peeking out the window, I saw a middle-aged man, slim and tall but not huge. He was bald on the top, with some short salt and pepper hair wrapping around the sides of his head. He had his hands behind his back. I can't recall if it was one hand or both, and in one of his hands was a metal object that I took for a knife, but to this day I can't say for sure what he was holding. He did not see me looking at him through the window, or if he did, he at least didn't look at me and let me know that he knew I was there. The way our house was designed, the front door was not visible from the street because there were bushes and tall trees blocking it. My 12-year-old heart sank knowing this random guy was at the door with what I thought was a knife behind his back, or at the very least a metal object that the man felt was necessary to put behind his back. It was especially terrifying because I recognized it was not super unrealistic since the man would not be visible from the street, and therefore he could hide something behind his back without worrying about the neighbors' cars passing by seeing him. This house would be a good target for somebody looking to do bad stuff, since you'd be shielded from being seen. At this point, normal paranoia became full-on fight-or-flight panic mode. It was like a switch was flipped from me just checking to see if the door was locked, to thinking there was a guy with a knife at the door who wanted to kill us. I creeped back to my dad's room and told my brother what I'd seen. He grabbed the house phone. I can't remember if there was one in my dad's room or if he had to go to another room, but before long he was speaking with my dad on the phone. My dad immediately instructed us to let his dog, a Rhodesian Ridgeback, in from the backyard. Let me tell you, in a situation of pure terror, having a big loud dog was the only bit of hope and relief. From there, my brother and I locked ourselves in a bathroom by the front door, not sure why we decided to hide in the closest room to the guy outside. But from inside the bathroom we called 911 while my brother clutched a kitchen knife, both of us crying and struggling to get words out to the operator. While in the bathroom, I heard the front door handle being twisted around, which would have meant that the guy was now trying to enter the house. The bathroom was only about 7 feet from the front door, so I could hear it loud and clear. I have such a vivid memory of us huddling in that bathroom, feeling truly helpless and out of control of what might happen next, with the only comfort being the noise of the dog barking at the front door. If the guy decided to kick the door down, he'd have to deal with a big dog and then have a knife fight with 2 kids. I was really hoping that the dog would hold it down for us, because I didn't like our odds if the man at the door got past him. Before long, the cops arrived, and shortly after, my dad and stepmom got home too. The guy was gone by then, and nothing ever came of it. To this day, my dad's theory is that the guy at the door was his neighbor coming over to complain, because apparently his dog would always bark at the neighbor while he was doing yard work. So my dad thinks the neighbor was trimming the bushes, and therefore just happened to have clippers or something in his hands when he came over to complain. Sounds reasonable enough, but I wish I had asked at the time to see the neighbor, because then I could truly identify him and know what the situation was. Personally, I'm open to my dad's theory, but it always seemed to me that my dad clung to it more for his own comfort, since the alternative would have been a parent's nightmare. If it were the neighbor though, some things didn't make sense. Like the guy conveniently showing up when no cars were in my dad's driveway since they left to go to the soccer game only 20 minutes prior. Seems like coming over when it appeared nobody was home would be a weird thing if you expected your neighbor to answer the door. Also, the guy trying to twist the handle was not a very neighborly act, trying to enter someone else's home while they're gone. Either way, whether the threat was real or imagined by my brother and I, it was very scary, especially if I hadn't got there in time to lock the door. Something really creepy happened to me last month. I live in an apartment building. It's pretty standard for the most part. The place is nice, and most of the residents seem nice as well. It's not a dumpy place or anything, but it's not the greatest in the world either. I've lived here for almost 2 years, and it's been good. There's a mailroom just inside the doors on the first floor where we get packages and stuff. I order things online all the time, and I have an Amazon Prime account that I use a lot. It's very convenient because you can get next day delivery sometimes. I remember that my coffee maker broke one day and I decided to order a new one. I drink coffee quite a bit, especially in the mornings before work. So I found one on Amazon for next day delivery. I saw when I was at work the next day that it had been delivered, and I went down to the mailroom when I got back home from work. However, when I arrived in the mailroom, I couldn't find my package. There's usually a lot of packages in the mailroom, but I looked at each and every one of them, and mine was not there. I didn't know if somebody had took it by mistake or what, because it said that it had been delivered. So I went back up to my apartment, and I was going on Amazon trying to figure out how to get my money back or something. Then, suddenly, there was a knock on my door. This was nighttime, so I didn't know who could be there. I got up and walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. Nobody was there. I opened up the door out of curiosity. There, sitting on the ground, was my coffee maker. I picked it up and was just so confused. I brought it inside and saw that the box was already open. The coffee maker was inside of it, but I had no clue why it was left on my doorstep now. After thinking about it for a while, the only thing I could think of was that somebody else took it by mistake. Maybe they thought it was theirs and opened it and then realized that it wasn't theirs. I really didn't know. That didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, but I couldn't think of any other logical explanation. I also didn't know who had done it. I decided not to contact Amazon or anything. I figured this was just a freak thing and it wouldn't happen again. And at the end of the day, I had gotten my coffee maker like I had ordered. After a few days, I pretty much forgot about it. I used the coffee maker and it worked fine and everything. Well, sometime the next week, I ordered something on Amazon again. This time, it was skincare stuff. I went down to the mailroom to get the package when I got home from work again. It said that it was delivered. So when I looked in the mailroom, once more, I could not find it. When I looked at every package there and none of them had my name on it, I remembered back to the last time. I thought to myself, this better not have happened again. I went back up to my apartment and really did not know what to do. Sure enough though, later on in the night there was a knock at my door. I quickly went over to it and opened it. Whoever had knocked was gone, but my skincare products were also not outside the door. Instead, there was a note there. I picked it up and read it. It said, "To get your package, come to 112. That was the number of another unit on my floor. I didn't know all my neighbors or who exactly lived in 112, but I now knew who was stealing my packages. I did not go to the room to get it. Instead, I reported it to management of the apartment building. They ended up investigating by looking at the security footage. A guy who I had seen around a few times but never spoke to was the culprit. It showed him taking both my packages back to his apartment. then putting the things on my front step. He ended up getting evicted for it. Why he did that, I don't know. I used to work as a pizza delivery driver for Domino's. The most insane thing that happened in my time there took place one late Friday night. Obviously, Fridays are pretty busy for pizza deliveries, and we were also open very late, I think to 2 a.m. So I started work at 6 p.m. and was working until close. It was a busy night as it went on, but I made lots of money in tips. When it was around midnight, things started to quiet down. I remember that we got an order and I was supposed to deliver it. It was just a simple medium pepperoni pizza, and I took it and went to my car. When I saw the address, I didn't think much of it at first. It was just an address. However, when I arrived, I realized that it was another Domino's pizza. I figured that this must be some kind of a prank or something. The Domino's location was less than 10 minutes from ours. But as you know, Domino's is an extremely popular chain, and they're all over the place. I wasn't quite sure if this was a mistake, or a joke, or a prank, or what. I parked in the parking lot, took the pizza, and then headed inside. I remember that this Domino's was in a sort of quieter street on the edge of an area with other restaurants and stores. The parking lot was mostly empty, and at the end of the small lot behind the building there was a steep hill going up with tons of trees on it. That led up to a wooded area. So I went inside the Domino's with the pizza, and the workers inside seemed confused. I said that somebody ordered a pizza there and asked if this was a joke. The 3 employees inside stopped making pizzas and all looked around at each other asking if they had pranked one of them. None of them had done it though. It seemed as though maybe someone else had. I asked if anybody wanted the pizza and they said no. However, the pizza was not paid for yet. I told them that I was just as confused as they were and I would take the pizza back and say it was a mistake or something. So I left the Domino's and started heading back to my car. Just then is when I heard a voice yelling from just inside the woods to my far left. It was a man's voice and he said, "Hey, over here." I looked and there was a guy standing a few steps on the hill. He said that he had been the one to order the pizza, so I started to walk over to him, hoping to get some kind of an explanation for this. I mean, what was he doing in the woods? Why didn't he just order from the Domino's that was right here? I figured maybe he made a mistake and ordered online from the wrong location or something. But if he was there, why would he request for it to be delivered? When I got to him, he didn't give me an explanation though. He just said, "Bring the pizza up here." Then the man started to walk up this narrow path that was barely even there through the woods. So I took the pizza up the steep hill, nearly tripping over all the tree branches and stuff. When I reached towards the top, we were in this thick woods where I could barely see. It was like pitch black, and the man stood there and then took the pizza from me. I told him the price, and he took his wallet out of his pocket and started counting his cash. As he was doing that, I looked around and then noticed something strange. There was another guy sitting in one of the trees about 20 feet up. The guy was wearing a ski mask as well, just sitting on a branch up in the tree, seemingly looking in my direction. This situation was seeming really sketchy and not something at all that I had signed up for. As soon as the guy gave me a $10 bill, I just took it, said thanks, and then started walking away very quickly. The guy said, "Don't you want a tip?" I said, "Keep it," and then just started to walk back down the hill as fast as I could. I didn't stop and nearly ran back down the hill the rest of the way to the parking lot. Then I literally jogged to my car, got inside, and left. I drove back to the Domino's that I worked at, and I told what happened to everyone that was inside working. They found it very amusing. I could laugh about it afterwards, but the scene was just so bizarre and strange, and I have no idea what was going on there. Maybe it was just a prank to scare me. If so, it certainly worked. It was a Thursday night, I think. I had just gotten home from work at around 8:30 p.m. I remember I was tired, my feet were sore, and I had been looking forward to a hot shower all day. None of my roommates were home. 2 were studying at the library, and the other one had gone home for the weekend. I always lock the front door behind me. It's a habit now. Our apartment isn't in the best part of town, and the complex has had some issues. Nothing serious, just sketchy people walking around at night mostly. I was maybe 10 minutes into my shower when I heard the front door open. At first, I thought maybe one of the girls had come back early. I waited, listening, but didn't hear any voices, just footsteps. Not heavy ones, just the soft, slow kind that make you feel weird when you hear them. I turned the water off so I could hear better. The bathroom fan was still humming, but I could hear somebody walking. I wrapped myself in a towel and opened the bathroom door just a crack. There was a man in our apartment. I only saw the back of him. He had just walked in like he belonged there. He looked around like he was scoping the place out, but he hadn't seen me yet. I slammed the bathroom door shut and locked it. It made a loud sound. I think it startled him because I heard him freeze. I didn't have my phone, no clothes, nothing. I pressed my ear to the door and heard him leave as the front door opened and closed. I stayed in there for a long time. Eventually, I ran to my room and grabbed my phone. I texted one of my roommates. I told her someone just came in and I didn't know who they were. She thought maybe they'd stolen something, but I didn't think so. I hadn't heard anything move or break. They were just looking. I did catch them basically right as they came in. I called the non-emergency police number, but I didn't have much to tell them. I didn't see his face, so I couldn't describe him. I didn't know if the door had been picked or if the lock didn't work great and he just pushed it open. I wouldn't be surprised since our apartment isn't new or in great shape. All I knew is that somebody came inside and I had been alone. I keep thinking about what could have happened. If I had still been in the shower when he reached the bathroom, or if I hadn't heard him and came out of the bathroom fully while he was there, or if he had been closer to me and I hadn't slammed the door fast enough. None of us really feel safe anymore. We've started checking the door multiple times a day. One roommate carries a taser now and another has a knife. We've only lived there for 3 months and 2 bad things have already happened. I had a really creepy experience happen the last time I went bowling. It was a couple of years ago, and I went to a bowling alley that's probably like 10 minutes from where I live. Now, I went with 2 of my friends, Ashley and Lizzie. I can't remember how, but Lizzie had several games of free bowling at this particular alley, so we were using them, and the place was actually pretty nice. There was also an arcade and a bar and many food options inside as well. It was pretty busy that night, and most of the lanes, if not all of them, were being used. I remember that probably like 30 minutes into bowling, this employee guy came up to us. He asked us how everything was going, and we said good. He came back like 20 minutes later again and asked us once more, and then he said that our lane had had some problems recently. We said everything had been working fine, and it had been. The guy then told us to let him know if anything happened. We thought the place just had good service and he was friendly, but the guy approached us again not long after that. He asked us if we were having a good time again, specifically me, and by now it seemed kind of weird how he kept coming up to us. This place was not like Topgolf or some bowling alleys, where as you're playing you have a waiter or a waitress and they get you food and stuff. For this bowling alley, you just ordered food up at the counter, and it was like most of them, so I wasn't really sure why this employee kept going up to us, and seemingly nobody else. After we told him that we were still having a good time, he asked us if we had any plans for later. We told him we were just hanging out, and maybe we'd get some food. We didn't really know for sure. The guy then asked us if we lived around there, and we said yes. During this time, we were all in college, but back home for the summer. This guy appeared to be around our same age, maybe slightly older, and after talking briefly about how we were in college and stuff, he left. It just seemed like a friendly employee for the most part, but a little bit off. A short time later though, I went back to the table behind our bowling lane to get a drink of water. When I did, the man was standing behind it. He told me that I was pretty good at bowling, which also indicated that he had been watching me. He then invited me to come back and bowl with him another time, saying we could bowl for free because he worked there. It seemed by this point like he was probably interested in me, and that's why he kept going up to us. I was nice, but I told him that I was not much of a bowler and I would not be doing that. He tried convincing me for a moment, but then it was my turn to bowl again and my friends called me over. I left, and they asked me why the guy was talking to me again. After this, I figured that he wouldn't be back. But only about 10 minutes later, he returned. He just walked up to us like he was part of the friend group. The guy told us that he was getting off very soon, and he was going to this club and asked if we wanted to join him. He then went on to say how the club was supposedly really hard to get into, but he knew the bouncer. We found this an odd thing for an employee to say to us, and did not have an interest in joining him, so we declined. He finally left us alone after that. Now, at this point, we did not have much more bowling left, and finished within probably 20 minutes. After that, when we were at the counter returning our shoes to an employee, a different employee, she asked us how it went. Lizzie told her that an employee of theirs kept bothering us the whole time. The girl working asked us who it was, and we described him to her. She was confused and said she didn't think anybody looking like that worked there. We looked around to see if he was still within sight. The place was really crowded. After looking around for maybe 10 seconds though, I noticed him. He was sitting at a random table by himself, sipping a drink. When we pointed him out, she said she had no idea who he was, but was confident that he did not work there. Then she told us she would be going to ask him who he was. At that point though, we all just left. We had taken Lizzie's car and she drove the three of us. After leaving the bowling alley, we went to a local restaurant in town and stayed there for probably almost an hour. Then we continued back, and Lizzie dropped me off back at my house. She pulled into the driveway and I got out. Then they left. As I was walking up to my house, I remember hearing another car driving down the street. Our street was usually very quiet, and I just looked over to see it. When I did, I saw the car come slowing down and appeared to pull over on the side of the road in front of our house. I was still walking towards the front door of my house, but I slowed down to see the person. What I saw next was the car pulling over and the driver's window rolling down. I saw that the same guy from the bowling alley was driving the car. I quickly hurried up to get inside. I got out my keys and tried to unlock the door as quickly as possible. When I was doing this, I actually heard the car door opening and then closing right after. I also heard footsteps and knew that the guy was approaching. Before he was able to get even halfway into the yard though, I got the door open. I quickly went inside and then locked the door behind me. I hurried to find my parents and let them know of the situation. Maybe 30 seconds to a minute later, we returned to the front of the house and looked out of a window. When we did, the man and his car were gone. He had left. And after that, he didn't come back either. I'm still pretty creeped out by the situation. To go to my house, he must have followed my friends and I the entire rest of the night. I'm not sure what he was planning to do going to my house. I'm just glad that he didn't come back. One night when I was younger, my mother and I had a scary situation involving a broken down car. It was just my mom, Kate, and I at home that night as my dad was out working late. It was a windy fall night, and I remember helping Kate make a late dinner right around sunset. We were in the middle of the process of cooking, cutting up a bunch of vegetables, when the front doorbell rang. I followed Kate as she went to see who was there. When we got to the door, there was a man standing right outside. I was instructed to stay out of sight behind the door, as Kate opened it slightly to ask the man what was going on. I listened to the short conversation as the man explained that he had a broken down car and was wondering if Kate could help by providing some jumper cables. Kate instructed me to stay inside as she put on her coat and proceeded outside in an attempt to help the guy. We did have jumper cables, and I watched from the window as Kate pulled her car around to face the man's car. It took a little bit to get it all set up, but finally they got the jumper cables and the stranger's car to turn on. The car seemed to start up, and after a brief conversation, the man thanked Kate and was on his way. At this point, it was getting really dark now, and Kate came back inside and we quickly resumed the preparation of dinner. We were hoping to have it ready by the time my dad got home. I'm not exactly sure how much time had passed. I'm guessing around a half an hour later though, and the doorbell rang again. Kate was visibly frustrated at the second ringing of the doorbell, and she went to go see who was there now. Since dinner was coming along and stuff was cooking already, I stayed in the kitchen to keep it going. As I was mixing the pot of food on the stove, I heard the sliding glass door just to my left make a noise as if somebody was trying to pull it open. The door, however, was locked. I placed the stirring spoon down I was using, and I took a couple of steps to my left to see what had made the sound. As I got closer to the sliding door to see, I couldn't really make anything out at first because of the darkness of the backyard, but I then saw a man's face emerge, and he pressed it against the glass of the door. Terrified by the jump scare I had received, I went backwards and screamed. It appeared to be the man from just a bit ago who Kate had helped jumpstart his car. I wasn't 100% certain it was the same guy, because I had only watched him from away through the front window, but he had the same color blue jacket that the man from earlier was wearing. Kate heard me scream and rushed back into the kitchen and immediately saw the man outside the sliding door, who was now violently trying to pull it open. The cops and my dad were both immediately called. My dad rushed home from work as soon as he heard about it. We went into another room and waited, but the man had fled by the time anybody arrived, and the making of dinner was an afterthought at that point. We ended up having to order pizza, as Kate explained the whole night's events to my dad and the police. Nothing was ever seen of the man again after that, but I will never forget that feeling when I saw the man's face. This is something that happened last summer. I live in a house with my wife and 2 daughters. My oldest daughter is 19 and she was home from college at the time. My youngest is 16 and in high school. Between the 4 of us living at the house, we order things online a good amount. It seems like every other day there's an Amazon package on the front step or something like that. So one night I remember that I was up a little bit later than usual. Both the girls were in their bedrooms upstairs and my wife had just gone up to bed. I was about to go upstairs, but I decided to load the dishwasher first to let it run overnight. After doing so, I was passing by the living room at the front of the house. I heard the sound of a car door closing in the otherwise quiet night. It got my attention and I glanced out the window to see a man come into view. This guy was walking in front of the house and then he started to go into our driveway. I didn't see the vehicle that he had come from my view, but I did see that the man was wearing a blue Amazon vest and he was also carrying a package. Now, I hadn't ordered anything, but I figured that either my wife or one of my daughters had. However, the strange thing is that it was 11:30 at night. I know Amazon delivers a lot, but I didn't think that they had deliveries in the middle of the night like this. Still, it was very possible, so I honestly didn't think too much of it. I was just about to go upstairs as I was standing at the base of them, but for some reason, I just decided to look out of the window to the man. When I did, he did not seem to notice me at all because the lights inside were out, and he walked up to the front door. However, he did not just put the package on the front step and then walk away like I thought he would. He stayed on the front step, which was out of my sight, for sort of a long time. Obviously, he did not knock on the door or ring the bell or anything. After like 15 seconds of him being on the front step, I got curious. I moved over to the window to see what the man would do. When I finally got a view of him, I saw him still holding the package, seemingly looking around, and then he moved away from the front step. Then he walked around to the side of the house. By this point, I was getting suspicious. After going out of my sight again, I went around the house to figure out where the guy had gone. I looked out of a side window but did not see him there. Then I thought I heard footsteps of somebody moving outside. They were towards the back of the house, and I walked over towards the dining room, which was at the back of the house. When I made my way there, I saw out of one of the back windows the man walk by for just a split second. Then I looked over to the back door and he came into view. I quickly ran over and turned on the light to the back. When I did, I saw the man then suddenly turn and quickly start running away. He took the Amazon package with him and went all the way back around the house. The guy did not stop until he went back off our property and into the street. I didn't get a good look at the car that he went into because we had a large tree in the way, but I did hear him get inside and start the engine, and then he drove away. I realized then that the man likely did not work for Amazon. It was most likely just a disguise to look like a regular delivery driver if anybody happened to notice him. I know that a lot of people work for Amazon and deliver at all kinds of times, but still I think people should always be aware of their surroundings and not get complacent. I went to bed after that, and the next day I told my wife and daughters about it. None of them were expecting an Amazon package to arrive overnight. It's very creepy to think of what might have happened had I not stayed up late that night. I live with my wife in a 2-story home, and we've been living here for almost 5 years now. I will never forget the scary thing that happened last year, though. The day had been pretty normal. My wife and I had both gone to work, and had been gone for most of it. We got back home and had a pretty normal night as well. When it was time to go to bed, we both went upstairs where our bedroom is. I remember that after getting into bed, my wife forgot something downstairs. I don't remember what, but she told me that she would be right back. By this point, all the lights in the house had been turned off. The next thing I knew, like a minute later, I heard my wife running back up the stairs really fast. She came into the bedroom with a scared look on her face. Then she told me that she thought she saw a man downstairs in the kitchen. I honestly didn't believe her at first. I mean, she hadn't turned on any of the lights. There was a little bit of light that would come in through a few windows so you could sort of see, but it was still very dark. I didn't know why she would think that she saw a man though. It just seemed so crazy to me. I told her that I would go downstairs and look around. She told me to be careful, but I was feeling confident. I left the bedroom, went down the hallway, and then walked down the stairs. Now, I'm not sure why I didn't turn the lights on as I went, but I didn't. When I finally got downstairs, at first I didn't see anybody and I didn't hear anything either. I walked over to the kitchen thinking that I was just going to confirm that nobody was around or anything like that. But when I approached the kitchen, I thought I heard a noise. It sounded like it was coming from the basement area. There was a door that was usually shut in the kitchen that led to the basement. I finally turned on a light and looked to the door. It was still closed, but I thought I heard somebody now at the bottom of the stairs in the basement. Now I was starting to believe that my wife might have actually seen somebody. I carefully went over to the basement door, now feeling kind of nervous. I opened it up, and it was very dark down there with no lights on. I hit the light switch, which was really just a dim bulb at the bottom of the staircase. This didn't provide too much light, but of what it did, I couldn't see anybody. I called out, asking if anybody was down there. I don't know why. And of course, I did not get a response. So then I decided to go downstairs. At this point, I wasn't hearing any kind of noises at all. I slowly went down one step at a time, looking around. When I had made it about halfway down the stairs though, I heard another sound. This one sort of sounded like it was coming from behind me, which was really strange. Then I realized that it was coming from under the stairs. Like many basements, ours was mostly for storage and was somewhat cluttered. There was some junk next to the stairs and underneath the stairs, which would have been a really good hiding place. As I looked to the side of the stairs, I was sure that someone was hiding under there. I did not panic and slowly walked back up. Then I left the basement, shut the door behind me, and then took out my phone and called the police. After that, I went back upstairs to our bedroom with my wife, and I told her about the guy that was under the stairs. I locked the door to the bedroom, and then we waited for the cops to get there. In the time of waiting, we did not hear anything else. I was nervous that the guy would come upstairs to our bedroom or something like that, but he did not. About 10 minutes later, the police arrived. They came inside and searched the basement. There, they found a man hiding behind the stairs, just like I had heard. The crazy thing is we don't know when or how he entered our house. We never really used the basement much and hadn't been down there in days, and there was no signs of forced entry like a broken window or something. He could have maybe snuck in at some point while we were outside, or maybe one of us forgot to lock a door. I still don't know. This happened around summer or fall of 2018, and at the time I was 15 years old. My family was out on a trip, and I was home alone for the weekend. When my parents left, I had mixed emotions of happiness and worry, because this was my first time home alone. That night it was around 10 p.m., and I had gone downstairs to feed my dog, and I realized that my back door was wide open. This wasn't unusual because I normally leave it open for my dog to run around outside, and my back garden is fenced off, so I normally don't worry. After feeding my dog, I closed the door and locked it. When I went back upstairs, I thought I heard a noise of shuffling somewhere around my house, but I just shrugged it off as my dog getting into her bed. I live on the 3rd floor of the house, so I have to get up on a ladder to get into my room. I sat there playing games for a couple of hours, and I was about to go to sleep at around 1 a.m., but I decided to get food before sleeping. As I entered the kitchen, I found the kitchen door open a bit, but not fully open enough for a person to fit through. I dismissed it as bad memory, thinking that I had forgotten to close it. Walking through the living room, I saw my dog seated in a corner looking scared and worried. For context, my dog is a small French bulldog incapable of hurting anyone, so seeing her like this worried me a bit. But sometimes she gets scared at little things or nothing at all, so I didn't think anything about it really. Fast forward to me being back upstairs. I felt myself drifting off while watching some random TV show I can't remember, when I heard my downstairs stairs creak. I started drifting off again until at one point I fell completely asleep. I remember waking up to a sound, not even sure what it was, but I just woke up. I slowly opened my eyes, and to my absolute horror, I saw a man with half his body peering through the hatch leading up to my room. Somehow I managed not to scream, and I pretended that I was sleeping and didn't see anything. I would say it was about 30 seconds before I heard the creak of my ladder as the man went down the ladder, but honestly it felt like hours. As I heard the door close to my brother's room, which you must walk through to get to the stairs to go back down to the first level, I reached for my phone and dialed the police. Surprisingly, it took them only a few minutes to show up at my house, and they did a quick sweep of the house to no avail. I slept at my grandma's for the rest of the night and the rest of the weekend, but I didn't get much sleep anyways. From then on, I was too scared to be home alone at all, and I always remember to lock my doors now. This happened back many years ago. I was in high school in the early 2000s, and one night my parents went out. They left me and my older sister at home, so it would just be the two of us at the house for dinner. Now, at the time, my older sister was 17 years old and I was 14. We lived in a house in a pretty typical neighborhood. Our parents left us some money to order a pizza or something, and that was the plan. When it got to be like 7 p.m., I told my sister that I was hungry and we should order from this one pizza place that was my favorite. She agreed, and then she called the store with our order. Around 20 minutes later or so, we were just in the living room watching TV, and the doorbell rang. My sister got up and answered with the money that our parents left us. I was like half paying attention as I was more focused on the TV. I heard my sister answer the door and the pizza guy say hello and stuff. I remember that I heard the pizza man ask my sister if she was home by herself, and she replied just saying no. The man said something like, "Oh really?" He couldn't see me from where I was in the living room. The guy said something else, but I couldn't really hear it. I heard my sister respond, but couldn't really make out what she was saying either, but it sounded like she was talking in a kind of rude way. I looked over at that point and saw that my sister appeared kind of annoyed. She handed the money to the guy, and then as he was still saying to have a good night, she slammed the door in his face. Then my sister locked the door as soon as it was shut, sighed, and started walking back over to the living room. I asked her what that was all about. She said, "I forgot about that creep." She went on to say that she was at her friend's house like 2 weeks prior, and the two of them had ordered a pizza. The same delivery guy was the one to show up. I guess that he acted really creepy, trying to flirt with my sister and her friend, and he even asked to come inside the house. They practically had to yell at him to leave and slam the door in his face. She said that she was planning to not order from that pizza place anymore because of him, but forgot about it. I thought that was weird, but I was glad that he was gone now and we had the pizza. I remember that just about 20 or 30 minutes later though, I heard a noise outside. It sounded like a car door closing. I looked out of the living room window and I saw the same pizza guy walking up to the house again. He had a small box in his hands and I wondered why he was at our house again. We hadn't ordered anything else. I warned my sister and she got up and said that she was going to call the police. Before she could though, the man started ringing the doorbell again. My sister and I ignored it at first. Then there was a knock on the door. My sister walked over to the door, did not open it or anything, but yelled at the man to go away. He yelled back from the other side, saying that he brought her a free brownie. She said she didn't want it and was going to call the police if he didn't leave now. What the man said next really creeped me out. He said that he knew my sister was alone and asked for her to let him in. That's when I knew I had to do something. This guy apparently really thought that she was home alone. I stood up and walked over to the door. Then, trying to sound tough, I yelled really loud in my manliest voice that I was also home and that I was going to come out and beat him to a pulp if he didn't leave. At first, I thought it didn't work. The man said something like, "Who's this tough guy?" He still stood around on the front step and didn't seem too affected, as my sister was now dialing the police. The guy laughed a little, as if trying to sound like the whole thing was a joke to him. Then, he finally turned and started walking off. I remember that he walked back to his car and then got in and drove away. The police still came to our house a while later though. My sister made a report and then the cops went to his work. I heard that the man later got fired. Thankfully, he did not come back to our house again after that. I'm glad that I was home that night and was able to help out my sister. The guy was a total creep, and hopefully he didn't harass anyone else like that. One summer evening when I was about 9 or 10, a serious accident happened just a couple of blocks from our farmhouse. We weren't home when it occurred, but had heard about it from our neighbors. The next day, curiosity got the best of me, so I asked my mom if I could ride my bike up to the corner where the accident took place. I wanted to check out the area to see if I could see anything that had been left over, and I was also just bored. My mom said yes, but warned me not to go any further. She was hanging laundry on the clothesline outside and kept an eye on me as I pedaled away. Our area was rural and quiet. My brother and I rode our bikes everywhere and always felt safe. When I got to the corner, I hopped off my bike and began to look around at the scattered debris. There were bits of broken glass and a crumpled piece of metal. I didn't know much about cars, but it was fun to look at for some reason. As I poked through the leftover wreckage, I heard a car approaching. It was a dark blue station wagon. The two men inside looked older, maybe in their 40s. I felt uneasy immediately, and then they rolled down the window and called out to me. They asked me which one of them was cuter. I jumped back on my bike, pedaling as fast as I could back to my house, which was less than half a mile away. I glanced over my shoulder and saw them turning the car around to follow me. As I biked down the road, I screamed at the top of my lungs, hoping my mom would hear. Thankfully, she had heard me and was running toward me, her face a mix of confusion and concern. The station wagon was close behind still, but as we neared our driveway, the men hesitated. They must have seen my mom coming closer, because they slammed on the brakes and turned their car back down the gravel road, heading away from us. I didn't stop pedaling until I reached my mom. When I explained, she was understandably shaken. She called the police, who came to get information, but there wasn't much they could do. I told them what I remembered about the car and the men's faces, but there wasn't too much to go off of, so I don't think they ever found them. It was scary that something so dangerous could happen so close to my house, where I had always felt very safe. One Friday night last summer, I was home alone while my family, besides my sister who was at work, stayed at the cabin. I'm used to staying home alone as this exact scenario is very common in the summertime, especially when I'm working and can't travel from the cabin and back. I'm not usually jumpy or afraid while home alone anymore, since I'm used to the odd creaks and settling noises of our old house. I was especially comforted by the fact that my sister's dog was also in the house with me that night, and most noises could be attributed to him. Plus, if anything were to happen, he would act as a guard dog of sorts and alert me to anything odd. He's the type of dog to bark at any noise or person walking past the doors or windows. So, the sound of his barks at nearly midnight were concerning. Despite my comfort with staying home alone, I'm still terrified of the premise of a break-in or some other uninvited human interaction at midnight. He kept barking and growling for a few moments too long, and I finally got out of bed. I left where I slept in the basement and walked upstairs to check it out. As I'd suspected, he was standing alert at the glass door. I was comforted for a moment until I walked over, ready to close the curtains and go back to sleep, and saw the door open about 2 or 3 inches. I had let Bosco, the dog's name, out earlier that night, but I know I closed the door. I'm a paranoid person with bad anxiety, especially concerning break-ins and things like that, so I would never while home alone forget to close the door, and I'm 100% certain of that. I figured Bosco did his job, and the intruder was scared away upon opening the door and seeing the dog right there barking at him. I closed and locked the door, double-checking that it was certainly locked. Using the flashlight on my phone, I looked around the entire second floor of my 3-floor house, including closets and other reasonable hiding spots, just to put my mind at ease. Upon finding nothing, I went back downstairs to my room. As I was down there, trying to push away the fear, I could hear Bosco walking around on the floor that doubles as my bedroom's roof. I thought I was overthinking it when it started to sound like human footsteps accompanied by Bosco's footsteps. He walked around for about 10 minutes before I put my earphones in and talked myself down until I could fall asleep. At about 2 a.m. that same night, my sister came home from work. I woke up a few minutes before this to Bosco in the basement whining at my door. He's not supposed to be in the basement. There's even a gate to stop him from getting to the basement. When I got up to let him outside, my sister walked in, and we let him out the front door rather than the glass patio door, letting him back in the same way. We talked for a while before I went back downstairs, and my sister went to the bathroom. I forgot about the door being ajar, busy with work for the next few days, and forgot to mention it to anyone until a few days later. My sister and mom were home with me for a movie night. I remembered the door situation when we were picking out horror movies to watch. I was sharing it as a creepy, almost funny story before my sister spoke up. She said that same night, an hour or so after she got home, she went to the kitchen and the door was open again. That same door that was locked from the inside and not opened since earlier that night. I couldn't believe it, and I started shaking the second this was revealed. We first started trying to explain it away, saying that maybe she had let Bosco out and forgot to close it until we both realized that we'd used the front door. Then we were trying to justify a reason someone would break in and not steal anything and proceed to stay for 2 hours before leaving. Ultimately, I realized that I quite possibly locked somebody in the house with me, then forced them to hide upstairs while I searched the second level of the house. Then this hypothetical person would be trapped up there, now knowing that the house was not empty and there was also a dog who would bark at them if they showed themselves again, alerting me to their presence. Then, when I was in the basement and my sister was in the bathroom, they ran out the glass door, which is timed perfectly with when my sister would have found the door open once more. She said this time it was much wider than when I had found it, and this makes sense if they were in a hurry on the way out and didn't bother to close it. Perhaps they left it open the first time for a quick escape, or to stop the loud sound of it meeting the door frame. Either way, it ties together too perfectly for me to reasonably brush it off. I'm not fully sure why Bosco wasn't going crazy at the man the whole time. Maybe some treats were involved, or maybe he just calmed down and didn't worry about the intruder after he initially entered the house. It was so strange, especially with nothing from our house missing. But in this small town, there have been many reports of break-ins. The other break-ins normally had nothing missing. It would be the same as what happened to us, literally only the break-in and entering part. I can't make sense of this, and I'm shaken up thinking of the possibility of somebody being in my house while I was asleep, alone in the basement. There's a part of me that doesn't believe it, but I can't shake the too many coincidences that all tie together to make this as concerning as it is. When I was a kid, I was always really scared of going down in our basement. I don't really know why, but I guess a lot of kids are scared of that sort of stuff. It just always felt like there might be somebody hiding down there or something. Of course, I knew that wasn't true, but any time I had to go down there alone, I would always run back up the stairs really fast. If someone else like my parent was down there with me and the lights were on, I wouldn't be so scared, but if I ever had to go down there alone, I was. So one time when I was 11 years old, I was getting ready for school one morning. My older sister had already left for high school, and I was going to ride the bus to my middle school when it came. Both of my parents left for work, so it was just me home alone for like 5 minutes. Normally, I would do things pretty last minute. I woke up about as late as possible before I would have to get ready for school. So I remembered that I was looking for my shirt, and I realized that it was downstairs. The laundry room was in the basement, and my mom had just done a wash the night before. I had to get my clothes from the hamper that was just outside of the clothes dryer. This meant that I would have to go downstairs by myself. Now, I wasn't as scared at 11 years old as I would have been at, say, 6, but I was still sort of scared. I went down the stairs and then made a beeline for the laundry room. Then I dug through the clothes until I found my shirt. After I got it, I went out of the laundry room and then sprinted for the stairs and ran up them. As I was running to the stairs, though, I thought that I saw somebody out of the corner of my eye. The basement was mostly dark, but it looked like a person was standing in the room just down the hallway. I never looked directly in that direction, and as I was running up the stairs, I told myself that it was just my imagination, and I actually believed that. I got back up the stairs, closed the door behind me, and then finished getting ready for school. I went outside, locked the front door, and then went to the end of the driveway. I made it with a minute to spare before the bus arrived. Then I boarded it and went to school. After the school day was over that day, I rode the bus back home and was dropped off at about 3 p.m. My sister was at volleyball practice until about 5, and my parents were both still at work, so I was home by myself for a few hours. This was common, and I was used to it. I would usually just hang out or do homework. So when I got inside that day, I went into the living room and started doing my homework to get it out of the way. I was sitting on the couch, and sometime during that, I thought that I heard the basement door open. This was really strange because nobody else was home. I didn't know what that could be. Instantly, though, my heart started racing and I was very nervous. I froze and listened. I thought that I heard footsteps. That area of the house was not in my view at all, but hearing those noises was enough for me. I ran as fast as I could to the stairs and then bolted up them all the way upstairs to my bedroom. Then I shut the door behind me and I hid underneath my bed. I was terrified. I still thought that somehow it was maybe my imagination though. I got the phone in my bedroom and I called my parents and told them about it. They said if somebody was in the house to call the police and also that they would be home soon. Now, after I got off the phone with them, for some reason I did not call the police. I think that I thought that I might have just been imagining what I heard. I never for sure saw a guy. Even that morning I was not 100% sure. Maybe I thought that I was just paranoid from earlier that morning. About an hour later, my parents arrived back home. When they did, I finally came out from underneath my bed and went downstairs again. And when I got downstairs, I saw that the basement door was wide open. I knew that I had closed it. The back door to the house was also unlocked, which had been locked all the time. Someone had been in our house. My dad looked all over but never found anyone or anything that was evidence. Nothing was missing or messed up. It remains a mystery of who entered our house and why. It still gives me the creeps to think about it to this day. This happened back when I was a teenager and in high school. I lived with my parents, but they both worked, so I was left home alone quite often. I remember that one evening my parents were both still gone. I didn't know exactly when they would be home. I was upstairs in my bedroom and on my computer. In the midst of this, I heard a knock on the front door of our house. When I heard it, it seemed strange right away because that was unusual. Our neighborhood was generally pretty quiet. Plus, it was a little bit later now, but I wasn't really scared or anything. I was more just curious, so I got up from my desk and then left my bedroom. It took me a while to walk downstairs and get to a window with a view of the door, so I half thought that whoever was knocking might be gone by then. But when I got to a window that looked out to the door, I saw 3 men standing there. They looked kind of sketchy, and I definitely was not going to answer the door for them. I kept watching them though. The men stood around for at least a minute. I didn't know who they were or where they had come from. Our neighborhood was quiet, like I said, and typically didn't have sketchy characters walking around. I was getting nervous now. Finally, the men started to walk away from the front door area, but they did not leave. Instead, they went towards my driveway. I thought they were leaving at first until they turned to the right. That's when I realized that they were going for the garage, and I remembered that our garage door was open. We had a garage that was attached to the house. We rarely closed the garage door because there was nothing really of value in it. My parents pretty much just parked their cars in it, and then there was some random other junk there. But there was also a door in the garage that connected to the inside of our house. That's when I had the sudden thought that that door might not be locked. I quickly ran over and looked, and sure enough, it was unlocked. I went over and locked the door as fast as I could. Then I walked away from it, and like 20 seconds after I had locked it, one of the men tried opening it. I could not believe how close I came to these men just entering my house. I was still really nervous though. What if they tried to break in or something? I quickly ran around and made sure that all the other doors were locked. I didn't want to hear what the men were doing, and I didn't know if they were still in the garage or what. I really didn't want to know either. So I went back upstairs to my bedroom and called the cops, as well as my parents. I stayed in my room until the police arrived. It felt like a long time, but it took less than 10 minutes for them to get there. When the police were there, they searched everywhere around our property, but the men were all gone. My parents arrived home shortly after. We talked with the cops for a while, and we had no idea who the guys were or what they wanted. I was just glad that they were gone. After that, I was pretty nervous for a while when I was home by myself. But thankfully, the men never returned to my knowledge, and nothing like that happened again. That attempted break-in still gives me the creeps to remember back on. I can't imagine what would have happened had I not locked that door. About a year ago, I was at Chipotle with a friend. One of my closest friends, Amy, and I were there sometime in the early afternoon. It wasn't really that busy inside of the Chipotle, but there were a few other people around. We were sitting at one end at a small table. I remember that at one point I got up to get some more lemonade. It was then that this random guy walked up and approached me. He was wearing cargo shorts, a t-shirt, and had brown hair that was sort of gray as well. The guy appeared to be in his 40s or so and walked right up to me. Then he said that he had to show me something. At that point, he started to walk away and kind of waved me over. Now, I have really no idea why I followed him, but I did. I didn't really think at all, just reacted. The way he said it made me think he was just going to the other end of the restaurant, and I was curious as to what he was talking about. But then the guy opened the one side door to the Chipotle, not the main door. This one led out to the patio area. It was a nice day, but nobody was sitting out there. We walked outside, and then the guy just kept going. He started to walk off the Chipotle property and into the parking lot of a nearby business. This parking lot was fairly large and also had a good amount of cars in it. I believe that a grocery store was the main business for that lot, but there were a few others as well. When we had made it maybe 20 feet into the parking lot, I realized that this was really strange. I asked the guy what he wanted to show me, but he didn't answer me. He just made another hand gesture for me to keep following him. I wasn't going to though. At that point, I stopped and I turned around and walked back to the Chipotle. I didn't hear the man say anything, and I'm not sure if he realized right away that I had stopped following him, because he wasn't looking at me. So at that point, I just went back inside and rejoined Amy at the table. She was confused and hadn't seen me leave, but noticed that I was gone for a long time. I told her about what happened, and we both agreed that it was really strange. For the rest of the time that we were inside eating, though, the man did not return. We stayed and talked for a while, and we were there for maybe 20 more minutes. Then we left the Chipotle to go to my car, which was in the parking lot. I remember that when I parked, there were no cars on either side of me, but now there was an SUV that was parked right next to my car. As we were approaching, the same man emerged from the driver's seat of the SUV. My heart sank when I saw him. He started walking up to us and then asked me directly why I didn't follow him. I said that I had to go back, and I asked him what it was that he was trying to show me. He didn't say, but he just said that he would give me a ride and motioned for me to get into his car. Then he walked back over to his SUV and told me to get inside and opened up one of the doors. I said no thanks, we had to be going now. By this point, the man was acting beyond sketchy. Amy and I quickly got inside of my car. The man ran around though and then came up to my driver's window. I heard him telling me to get out and that I needed to go with him. I yelled loudly that he needed to leave us alone or I was going to call the police. The man finally stopped and took a few steps back. Then I put the car into reverse and started leaving. However, after backing up a few feet, the man suddenly raced over and kicked the fender of my car pretty hard. I kept backing up and then turned and put the car in drive and left. Thankfully, the man didn't try to follow us in his car, and when I looked afterwards, my car had no damage. But something about that guy was really strange. I'm not sure what exactly his plan was. Where was he trying to lead me to? I'm not really sure, but I hope that I never see him again. I used to work as a delivery driver for the local pizza place that was by me. It was a pretty good place and popular in the local town. There would be a lot of deliveries that I would get, and I would have to drive all over. I still remember my creepiest delivery though. It was kind of like the stereotype delivery that I did not want to get when I signed up for the job. So we got an order pretty late at night, like 11 p.m. I got the pizza and then I got the address and headed out. I didn't know where it was, but I knew that I had never really delivered to that area before. At this point, I was still fairly new to the job, and I was also young, like 18 years old. Upon arriving to the neighborhood, I saw that it was really sketchy looking and run down. Many houses there had overgrown yards, and some had boarded up windows. There were old cars with duct tape holding up the fenders and looking all beat up. When I got to the house that I was to deliver to, it didn't look any better than the rest. I was already creeped out and didn't even want to leave the car, but I had a job to do, so I parked on the side of the street and then got out. There was also hardly any light provided by street lamps. There were just a few, and then I crossed the street and I walked onto the property. I made my way to the front step and then rang the doorbell. I saw that all the lights inside the house appeared to be off, which was not a good sign. As I waited, I was getting more and more nervous by the second. After probably a full minute, I still hadn't heard anything. I wanted to just bolt out of there and go back to the shop. Still, I forced myself to stay there because the pizza had not yet been paid for. Within a few more seconds, I started to hear movement inside, like somebody was walking around, but I still didn't see any lights turn on or anything. I just had a strong instinct to run and get out of there, so I did. I just set the pizza down and then bolted, like I had wanted to do much earlier. I literally ran off the property, leaving the pizza on the front step. Then I crossed the street again and made it to my car. After I got inside and started the engine, I felt much safer. Before leaving, I looked around. That's when I saw what appeared to be a man walking through the front yard. It was really dark, so I couldn't see very well, and the house was slightly behind me, but I saw a guy start to walk out and cross the street from the property. He was like 50 feet at least behind my car, and he wasn't walking towards me, but it still seemed odd. It seemed like this was the guy who had been in the house, and he hadn't even picked up the pizza. So at that point, I started to drive away. As I was making my way down the street, I saw the lights to this car that had been parked a ways behind me on the street turn on. That guy must have gotten inside of it. Then the car started driving. The first thing that I noticed at this point was how quickly the car accelerated, much too quick for the residential street that we were on. As I continued to drive, the car quickly caught up to me and was soon right on my bumper. That gave me a bad feeling once again. I turned off the street to a busier one, and the car behind me did the same thing. I realized then that I was likely being followed. I started driving around randomly and turning at random places. The car kept up with me and did the same things that I did. With it being really late at night, the roads were pretty quiet. That made it probably easier for the guy to keep up with me. It wasn't until I had been randomly driving around for like 10 minutes that I remembered to go to a police station, and it worked like a charm. The guy followed me until we were there. Then he circled around the parking lot of the station before leaving. I stayed there for a few minutes, called my boss to explain what had happened, and then went back. Luckily, I didn't get in trouble with my boss for not getting the money for the pizza. He understood that it could have been dangerous. I didn't have to deliver to that neighborhood again, which I'm really grateful for. Other than that, I enjoyed being a pizza delivery driver. That story still gives me the creeps to think about, though. Something weird and bizarre happened one time when I was in high school. I remember that I was in a typical gym class, and one day we had to do the pacer test. For those who don't know, this is basically a test to see how long you can run. Everybody lines up at one end of the basketball court, and when you hear a sound, you have to run to the other end. The sounds keep going, and each time you hear the sound, you have to run back to the other end. The sounds get gradually closer together, so you have to run faster as it goes. When the test started, I was hoping to win, or at least do really well. I remember that some of my classmates were joking around at the start. They were sliding headfirst into the lines and that kind of stuff in the first couple of sounds. On one of the first runs, there was this door on the right side of the far other end of the gym. I noticed that there was this man standing there with his arms folded looking real serious, and he was watching us. I didn't know who he was. He was not a teacher that I recognized, and I had never seen him before. The test kept going, and as I ran faster, I stopped paying attention to the guy. Soon many kids stopped, and it was just me and a few others still running. Towards the end, I noticed that the guy was still standing there. Soon after, a few other kids dropped out, and I ended up placing second. After that, we ended up playing dodgeball for the rest of the class period. I remember seeing the door opening, but the guy was no longer there. I didn't really think much of it for the rest of the day. After the school day was over though, and we were let out, I was leaving to go home. I remember that I used to walk home during this time because I didn't have my driver's license yet. It was about a 20-minute walk, but I'd cut through the parking lot and go sort of behind the school. I remember seeing the man standing at the back edge of the parking lot the same way with his arms folded. It was like he was looking really serious and looking around. Again, I had no clue as to who he was, but I assumed he worked for the school in some capacity and must be new or something. I didn't really walk that close to him, and I just continued through the parking lot. Eventually, I made it off school property and I walked the rest of the way home. So the next day when I showed up at school, I got to gym class, and I remember that our teacher took us into a classroom. Nobody really knew what was going on. Then some of us students got asked questions if we saw a man the previous day. I remembered the guy and said that I did. There was another teacher who asked me questions about the guy. I was told that there was an investigation for suspicious activity, but I wasn't given any other details. I told him what I could, and about seeing him after school as well. Then I was let back into class to resume school. I didn't know what that was all about. I tried to ask around, but nobody really seemed to know anything. They just said that the guy was suspicious and wasn't supposed to be there. It seemed like nobody knew who he was. But after that, I never heard anything more of it. I never saw the guy again either. I still don't know what exactly that was all about. It's kinda creepy to look back on and think about though. So before I tell you this story, I just want to say that I know I was stupid. I should have known better, I messed up, and I learned my lesson. But basically, I live alone in a sort of small house. The neighborhood is very busy and populated, and this is the first house that I've owned. Not too long after buying it, it was the springtime, and I was off of work one day. As I was home inside the house, there was a knock at the door. I walked over and opened it up to see a man standing there. He was wearing a work belt with some tools on it, and a sort of dirty sweatshirt and hard hat. He looked to be some kind of construction worker or maybe contractor. He introduced himself to me and said that he worked for the city and had been told to inspect our block. I was young and I believed him. I didn't question his credentials or anything. The man told me that he had walked around my property and felt that my basement was in great danger of flooding. He used some complicated terminology describing stuff that I did not understand. But his main point was that when all the snow was melting and it would rain a lot in the spring, my basement would probably flood. I guess my foundation had cracks in it or something. He asked me if he could come inside the basement and look around. Apparently, if I had some kind of work done, then the house would be safe. I was skeptical because I didn't want to be scammed into getting a bunch of work done to the house that I had just recently bought. The man told me that he was not trying to sell me anything because he would not be doing the actual work. He just wanted to see if my house had already had some kind of work done to it, and it might not need anything. So I reluctantly told him that he could come down into my basement and look. Now, I had a finished basement in the house. I hadn't done too much to it yet, but there was carpet floors and I had a couch in the main room. There was also a bathroom and a spare bedroom that I was maybe going to turn into an office or something. That was just another reason why I was concerned if it might flood. If it had just been some unfinished concrete floor basement, then it wouldn't be quite as big of a deal. We both went downstairs into the basement. He started walking around and talking about the walls and stuff. Then he told me to follow him. He went inside the small room that was like a closet and had the breakers and stuff in it. We went in there and he was going to show me something. Then he told me to wait there and he left the room and closed the door behind him. So then I was shut into the room and I was wondering why. I heard him right outside the door and did not know exactly what he was doing. He told me to wait there and he was going to test something. Then he just walked away. I went over to the door and I tried to open it. However, it would not open. It was like I was locked in there. The door started to open and got maybe an inch, but then it wouldn't go any further. Something was preventing the door from opening. I yelled for the man, asking what was going on. He was gone though. The man had gone back upstairs. I tried to open the door and pushed harder and harder, but I just wasn't strong enough. I was so confused. After yelling some more, I was convinced that the man had intentionally locked me in there. I then got out my phone and called the police. They said that they would come to my address immediately. In the meantime, I continued to try to break out of the small room that I was in. I just couldn't do it though, and I was very confused as to what was going on. A short time later, I heard the front door open and close. I didn't know if it was the cops or the man, but I would say that a few minutes after that, I heard the front door open again, and this time it was the police. They entered the house and came into the basement. Then they were able to get me out of the room. The man had tied some kind of really strong cable around the door handle, and then put it around the corner and tied the other end around a pole. He must have had that on his work belt. I went upstairs to see that the man had stolen my wallet, among other things. So he basically locked me in the basement and robbed me, except the man was completely gone. He had left before the police got there. I gave the police all the information that I could, and then they left. I'm really hoping that the man was caught, but I never heard anything. I'm still mad at myself for letting him in the house, but I learned my lesson. I went bowling last year with my friend Alex. We both like bowling and always have a fun time, even though neither of us is really that good. I remember that we went to this one bowling alley that neither of us had been to before. We have a main one that we typically go to, but we also like to discover the other nearby places and compare. This alley in particular was alright. It was not that large and had a pretty average setup. So when we got to the bowling alley, it was earlier in the night. We went up and bought a few games, then got our shoes and headed to our assigned lane. After bowling the first game, we pretty much started the next one right after. At this time, the alley was still pretty quiet, with a few other people bowling to our left, but several lanes away. I remember that randomly, in the middle of the game, something really strange happened. You know the screens that show the people's scores and give animations for a strike and stuff? Well, on our screen, it just said my name, first and last, in very basic font. To that point, it had been normal. It had shown our scores and the games and that kind of stuff. Well, now it was just my name, and the entire rest of the screen was just blue. It was so weird, and I figured it to be a glitch. But then I realized that I had never told the people here my name. I mean, I had paid with my debit card, so possibly they got the information that way. But why would it be on the screen like that? Plus, the names that Alex and I chose for our games to be on the screen were just our initials, not our full names. I was just staring at the screen, waiting for it to go back to the screen with our scores on it. But instead of changing to that, it then changed to a picture on the screen. It was grainy, but I soon realized that it was a picture from a security camera. It was taken of Alex and me as we walked into the bowling alley that night, less than an hour prior. That picture stayed on the screen for like 30 seconds. Then it changed again, this time to more security camera footage. It was a brief clip of us walking inside of the bowling alley. The clip replayed several times, and after that, there was another security camera clip. this time of me actually bowling. Now, none of these clips were very good quality, but I could still tell what it was. It must have been taken just minutes earlier. Alex and I were just staring at the screen with amazed looks on our faces. We had absolutely no idea why this was happening or who was responsible. I was about to go walk up to the service desk when it finally changed back to our game. I still looked over to the desk. I thought maybe I would see some employee watching us and laughing or something, but I didn't. I saw the same girl who had been at the desk when we entered. She appeared to be about high school or college age, and she was seemingly at the desk the entire time. I doubted that she was responsible for this. We decided to just keep bowling. So we bowled our next games and nothing else strange happened. Then we were done. When we went back up to the desk to talk to the girl. The same girl was still working. When we were there, I decided to bring up the strange occurrence. I told her about what we saw on the screen and stuff. The girl seemed confused and said that she didn't deal with any of the TVs and didn't know why that would happen. I asked her if somebody else working might have done that, and she said that she didn't think so. I wasn't really sure what else to do about it, so Alex and I then just left. We were talking about it for the rest of the night though. I'm confident that it was an employee who did it, but I don't know who or why. To me, it just creeps me out. I don't know anybody who works at that bowling alley. Possibly they were just bored from it being a slow night and are really good with computers. I'm not great with computer stuff, so maybe someone who hears this can tell me their thoughts on it. To this day though, I get kind of freaked out thinking back to it. I've not been back to that bowling alley since either. I live in a busy city and would often ride my bike to get places so that I wouldn't have to deal with traffic, and I just enjoy biking. I had a heavy single-speed bike that was perfect for short trips but would always be a workout when going up hills. One evening, I decided to ride to the grocery store. My route took me through a park, one that I had biked through before and knew well. As I pedaled along the dirt path that ran around the perimeter of the park, I found myself struggling up a hill. The weight of the bike felt particularly burdensome, and I could hear the sound of someone jogging behind me. The rhythmic thud of feet hitting the ground was unmistakable, and it grew louder as they gained on me. Feeling embarrassed by my slow pace, I decided to let the jogger pass. I veered to the right, expecting them to zip by, but they didn't. I kept pedaling, trying to speed up, but the sound of their footsteps stayed right behind me. I didn't want to risk looking behind me while biking up the hill, in fear of hitting a rut or rock in the dirt path. I even slowed down a ton, just waiting for them to pass, but they never did. Finally, I pulled off the path and into the grass, ready to turn around and give whoever it was a piece of my mind. But when I turned, I was met with nothing but empty trail. No jogger and no more footsteps, just silence. I looked around, scanning the park for any sign of movement, but there was none. The jogger had vanished. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I was baffled because I was certain I had heard someone right behind me. After a few minutes of standing there, I finally hopped back on my bike and continued to the grocery store. That night, back at home, I started to look up more about the park that I was biking through. Apparently, the park had been built over a cemetery, primarily for the poor. They had moved some bodies, but not all. Estimates suggested there were still around 2,000 remains buried underneath the park. I even found stories from people who claimed to have seen apparitions or felt cold spots while walking through the park at night. It seemed to make sense now that if the park was haunted, that it had something to do with my experience while biking through it earlier that day. I still bike through that park fairly often, but haven't had anything strange happen to me again, although I try to avoid it at night. This story takes place several years ago now. At the time, I lived in an apartment by myself. I don't live there anymore and only lived in this particular place for 1 year. So it was a pretty decent apartment complex. The building was pretty new, probably less than 10 years old. It was clean for the most part and a nice place to live. Very shortly after I moved into my place is when this happened. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of the building. I was inside my place one night and it was getting pretty late. Things were quiet because of this, and out of nowhere I heard a knocking coming from the wall. This wall led to the apartment that was next to mine. I didn't know who lived there and had never seen them or anything. They knocked on the wall and then stopped, and then they knocked again. I had no idea why they would be knocking. It sounded very deliberate, not like they had bumped into the wall by accident or something. But I wasn't making any loud noises or anything. Things had been very quiet. I was confused. The knocking stopped for a short time, and then I heard it again. It was really strange. I thought about knocking back because I was kind of frustrated. I mean, I wasn't doing anything, and it was late at night. Why would they be knocking on the wall like that? Eventually, it stopped though, and I just let it go. By the next day, I forgot all about it. However, that night it happened again, and I was reminded. The knocking started up right about at the same time as the previous night, if I had to guess. I didn't know what to make of this. Again, I wasn't being noisy at all, and nobody in the building seemed to be making a lot of noise, so it's not like they mistaked me for somebody being loud. It was very confusing. Like before, they knocked a few times on the wall and then stopped. Then, like a minute later, they knocked again. It was very strange. Eventually, again it stopped, and it was done for the night. The next day, I found out that the apartment next to mine was called a show unit. This means that nobody lives there, and when people get a tour of the apartment, they show them that one. That was even more confusing to me then, because that meant that nobody lived there. So why was I hearing knocking coming from that apartment very late at night? It was really strange. And that night, I heard it again. It was probably at around the same time as before. I wasn't looking at a clock, so I don't know exactly, but I'm guessing that it was. I was so curious about it, so this time I decided to investigate. I got up and walked out the front door of my apartment. I was now out in the hallway, and I walked towards the one next to mine. Things were very quiet, and nobody was out in the hallway at this hour. I approached the door to the apartment next to mine, and I noticed something. It was actually open. I couldn't really see inside, but the door was not shut all the way. It was resting against the door frame, but not closed. I walked closer to it, and then decided to open it further. I knew this was nobody's place, so nobody should be inside of it. When I pushed the door open, I saw all the lights inside were off, so I couldn't see who or if anybody was actually in there. It was really quiet as well. I started to take a step inside, and then I heard footsteps. They were far away, but inside of the apartment, and the footsteps were heading in my direction. I got so freaked out that I just turned around and left. I quickly walked out of the apartment and then back to mine. I went back in and locked the door behind me. Probably 10 seconds after I was back in my place, I heard footsteps out in the hallway. Then they went right up to my door and somebody tried opening it. I was so creeped out by this point. After attempting to enter my place, they did not knock, but I heard them walking away. I went to the door and looked out, but they were gone by then. It was very strange. After that night, I never heard any more knocking coming from there. I still don't know who it was or why they were doing it. This story takes place back when I was 14 years old. I was a freshman in high school, and one evening my friend Dante came over. We would always play video games together when we had the chance, and usually down in my basement. My dad always called the TV in the living room his sports watching TV, and he had a lazy boy chair there as well. And that was fine with me, because the TV in the basement was larger. This time though, we were home by ourselves. My parents and older sister were all going to be gone until later that night. Dante and I were just hanging out playing Madden when we randomly heard this noise from upstairs. I was so confused because I knew that nobody in my family would be back yet. I asked Dante if he heard it too, and he said yes. We did have a cat, but the sound that we heard was like a person walking. A cat obviously could not make a sound that loud. Then we heard it again. We both paused the game and got up at about the same time. We were in the main room down in the basement, but decided to go to the spare bedroom down there. We quickly ran over and then locked ourselves in. I felt much better knowing that the door had a lock on it. Still, I didn't know what exactly was going on. As we were in there, we then heard the sound of somebody coming down the stairs. That's when I got really nervous. We both kept silent and did not move, as we heard someone now walking into the basement. They went into the main room and then sort of started to walk over to us. I was literally holding my breath, as was Dante. About 10 seconds later, the person seemed to walk back towards the stairs and then go back up them. We knew that we needed to call the police. I didn't have a cell phone back then, but Dante did thankfully, and he called 911. We were trying to be very quiet and said that we thought someone had broken into our house. They said help was on the way and to stay put where we were. 911 stayed on the line with us the entire time. I could sort of hear the person walking around upstairs, but just barely. The police arrived very quickly, taking just over 5 minutes, although I will say it was some of the longest 5 minutes of my life. When they got there, they found a man upstairs. Some random guy was in our house. I remember he was claiming that he thought he was at his friend's house and he just had the wrong address. I didn't believe him though. The way he got in was through the back door. It had been left unlocked. Not long after that, my parents got home. That was one of the craziest moments of my life. This is something that happened about 2 years ago. I was in college at the time, living in this old 2-bedroom beat-up house. I lived with my roommate named Robbie Anderson. We both worked part-time jobs as well as had classes at all random times, so I didn't see Robbie really that much. We were friends though, but not like best friends or anything. So one evening, Robbie was gone at work. It was about 9 o'clock at night, and I was inside watching On Patrol Live on TV. The living room was at the front of the house, so I could see out of it pretty good. I remember noticing something out of the corner of my eye. I looked over and saw this random guy who I didn't know just walking right into our front yard. This looked very suspicious to me. The guy walked up to the front door and then started to try to open it. Now, there were 2 doors there. The first was a screen door, and the second was the much stronger and solid regular door, so you would have to open up one and then the other to get inside. Both of these happened to be locked though, as we did not live in the safest neighborhood. I instantly got up from the couch and walked over to the door. After the guy tried to open the first door, he then knocked on it. I made my way over there and I opened up the first door. When I did, I saw the man standing there before me. He had a pretty large build, was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and had brown hair. I said in a borderline rude way, "What do you want?" The man said that he was from Amazon and he was there to deliver a package. I said, "Well, where is it?" The guy didn't have anything with him. He said that it was back in his truck, and it was policy that I had to sign for it first and then he would go and get it. I knew that I hadn't ordered anything on Amazon, and I told the man that. The guy then asked me if anybody else lived there, and I said, "What's it to you?" He claimed that he was supposed to deliver the package. It seemed sketchy, and I doubted that Robbie had ordered something like that. The man then ordered me to open the door so I could sign for the package. He said that it was very large and expensive, and I needed to help him get it out of his truck. I told him to get lost, and then I slammed the door in his face. The guy stood there for a moment, and then I heard him loudly curse at me a few times. Then he walked back through the yard and left. After he was out of my sight, I called Robbie and told him about it. Robbie confirmed that he had not ordered anything. I was glad that I didn't open the door for that guy. I mean, he wasn't even wearing anything that indicated he worked for Amazon, and he didn't even have a package with him. It was about as sketchy as can be. After that, I didn't see that guy again for the time that we lived there. I was on my way home from a long day when my car started acting up. It had been sputtering for a while, and then without any warning, it just gave up. The engine had died, and no matter how hard I tried, it would not start again. I was stuck on a deserted stretch of road with no cell phone service. It was late, maybe around 11 p.m., and the only light came from the moon and the occasional passing vehicle. Other than that, it was pretty dark out. I got out and I tried to flag somebody down, but the cars that did pass didn't even slow down for me. After a couple more failed attempts of trying to flag down a car, I decided my best bet was to try hitchhiking to the nearest town. I was about 15 miles away, and I figured that somebody might be willing to help me out. I started walking, and after a while, a car finally pulled up beside me. It was a beat-up old sedan, and the driver was a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard. I was hesitant but desperate, so I explained my situation and asked if he could give me a ride to town. He said he was heading that way and that I could come along with. I got in and we started driving. At first, we started talking and having friendly conversation. The man asked me about my car and I told him what had happened. He talked about his own car troubles and how he knew a good mechanic in the town. It seemed normal enough, but something about him made me uneasy for some reason. Maybe it was the way he kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, or the fact that he didn't seem to be driving the most direct route. As we drove, the conversation shifted to more personal topics. He asked me about my family, my plans, and then started asking me more probing questions about where I was going and why I was alone. I answered as vaguely as I could, and he seemed to be fishing for information. Then, about halfway through the ride, the man suddenly turned onto a smaller road. It was dark and there were no streetlights at all. I asked where we were going, and he said he was taking a shortcut. Of course, that gave me a bad feeling. This road was uneven and twisted through the woods. I was starting to get really anxious, and I told him that I appreciated the offer, but maybe I should just get out and walk if we were going off the main road. He laughed and said not to worry. I started to think about my options, realizing that I might have to jump out if things got even worse. Finally, the man pulled over, saying that he needed to check something under the hood. I stayed in the car, but I was ready to bolt if I needed to. He got out and he popped the hood. I watched him through the window. He was fiddling around, but his movements seemed oddly calm. I started to panic and decided that I was just going to make a run for it. Just as I was about to open the door, though, the man got back inside the car. He said it was just a minor issue and we could keep going. I just nodded, trying to stay calm. We drove for a little bit longer until we finally reached the town. I thanked him and then I got out as quickly as I could. Without hesitation, I headed straight to the nearest gas station where I could call a tow truck for my car. I did so, and then while waiting for help, I kept glancing around, still feeling uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong with that ride. When the tow truck arrived and I explained what happened, the driver seemed concerned. He said he'd heard of similar stories before, where people had been led into the woods and then robbed, or worse. I got my car towed to the garage and I spent the night at a nearby motel. I didn't get much sleep that night and the whole experience was very odd to me. Maybe I was overreacting because I had never been in a situation like that before, but I kept thinking about that night and how things could have turned out differently. He could have just been a quirky guy with bad timing, or maybe he had something more sinister planned. Either way, if that ever happens again, I plan on being more cautious about the whole situation. This is something that happened a few years ago. So, I live alone in a 2-story house about 10 minutes outside of the city. I enjoy living here, and one night I ordered a pizza to be delivered. I was certainly craving a nice pizza, and I was excited for it to arrive. A while later, I heard the doorbell ring, and I walked over and answered it. It was the pizza delivery guy, and I handed him the money, and he gave me the pizza and breadsticks. My hands were full, and I remember that after saying bye to the delivery guy, I was struggling with the door. He said that he would get it, and he shut the door for me as I walked to the kitchen with the pizza boxes. Then I went and got some pieces of pizza, went into the living room, and watched a movie while eating. It was a great relaxing night, until a few hours later. I was now watching another movie and still on the couch. Out of nowhere, though, I heard the front door opening. I was so confused at first. Obviously, I live alone, so nobody else would be entering the house. It was at that moment that I realized I hadn't locked the front door. Normally, it's a habit that whenever I close the front door, I lock it. However, my hands had been full with the pizza, and I hadn't closed the door. The pizza guy had. I had simply forgot to go back and lock it. I couldn't believe someone was entering the house, though, and I didn't know who. I did what made the most sense to me at the time. I jumped down from the couch onto the carpeted floors. Then I crawled over to the corner of the room, and I hid behind this large lazy-boy chair. The living room was also in the back corner of the house, and the opposite end from the front door, so I had a little bit of time to hide. It was a pretty good hiding place, but if whoever was in my house really looked, they would find me. I heard footsteps, and I realized that I didn't have my phone. I had left it on the couch about 15 feet away from me. This was not good. Whoever was in the house entered and then started walking closer. They went into the kitchen area and then the dining room. Then I heard them start to enter the living room. That's when I got really nervous. However, whoever this was didn't get that close to where I was hiding. They stayed at the far end of the room and seemed to walk up the stairs. I didn't dare try to look and see who it was, and I stayed put. When I heard the person reach the top of the stairs, I decided to make a run for it. I knew that I would be able to make it out of the house if I was quick. So I got up, tiptoed to the couch, got my phone, and then ran over to the front door. I left the house, called 911, and then ran to my car and got inside of it. I drove a few blocks away and waited for the police. They arrived a short time later and entered my house with my permission. They ended up finding a man hiding upstairs in my bedroom. I had no clue who he was and had never seen him before to my knowledge. He obviously had just walked right in the house. I was really grateful that I was able to get away when he went upstairs. I'm also grateful that he was still there so the police were able to catch him. I live in a very large city, and I take the subway to and from work every day. It's part of my routine, and usually it goes just fine. Over the years, I've seen some pretty interesting people on the subway. There's also some sketchy people from time to time as well. So one night, when I was taking the subway back after work, I didn't bat an eye after seeing a guy wearing a ski mask. It was later, and the train was not packed, but there were several other people riding it. This guy was sitting across from me and a little ways down. He wore all black clothing from his shoes to his sweatshirt, and he even wore gloves. The strangest part was that the ski mask was completely covering his face along with sunglasses. I couldn't tell you anything about what the guy looked like underneath. He seemed to be slightly tall and have a slightly muscular build, but overall I didn't really give him much thought. I was pretty much on my phone mostly, just looking around on various apps like I usually did. After riding the subway for a while, it was soon time for my stop. I must have been a little bit distracted though, because I almost missed it. I remember the car stopping, and I figured that it was the stop before mine, so I didn't even bother to look up. But then I realized that I might be mistaken, and I did look up to see that it was in fact my stop. I quickly stood up and then headed for the doors before they closed and the car would take off again. Luckily, I was able to make it, but as I was walking to the door, I remember noticing the masked man getting up as well, like right after me. This was a little bit suspicious. In the moment though, I was too focused on making it out of the doors. After I left the subway car, the man left shortly after me. I started walking through the station to then go upstairs. There were a few people outside walking, but really not that many. I soon walked up the stairs and then went out of the subway station. Now I was on the sidewalks of the city at night, and there were less people around. But within a short time, I noticed that the masked man was walking a little ways behind me. I was now pretty concerned that he was following me for some reason. I didn't know why he would be, but it sure seemed a lot like he was. So I kept going, and I turned where I usually did. When the guy behind me also turned, I knew that I had to do something. I was about 5 minutes of a walk from my apartment, and I knew this part of the city like the back of my hand. I got to another straight part in the sidewalk, and the guy was still behind me. He was trailing me by roughly 40 feet or so he was not right behind me or anything. There was a shop that I knew was still open, and when I reached it, I went inside. It was a deli, and they had a door in the back that not everybody knew about, but I had gone there quite a few times. I walked straight for the back, and as I was rounding the corner towards the door, I looked behind me and saw the guy entering. I quickly went out of his sight, found the back door, and went out of it into an alley. When I got into the alley, I literally ran for the street and was able to make it. I walked the rest of the way back home without seeing the guy. I'm fairly certain that he was following me. I'm not sure why, but I'm glad that I didn't have to find out. Since then, I haven't seen him, and I haven't had any more creepy things happen to me on the subway. I worked at Chipotle for a while up until about 2 years ago. Towards the end of my time there, I remember this one incident that really made me want to quit. So I was working behind the counter, and it had been a kind of busy evening. By now, it was maybe 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, so it was just starting to quiet down. There were a good number of people eating inside, and there was finally no line of people waiting to order anymore. I remember that a man walked in and approached me at the counter. I asked him what he wanted, and he proceeded to try to use every so-called hack and strategy under the book. He started out by asking for a bowl with brown rice and half chicken, half steak, and asked me to, quote, load it up. I asked him if he wanted a double serving of chicken or steak, and he said no, he just wanted 1/2 of each. So I gave him a generous serving of rice, but I wasn't going to risk getting in trouble and being reckless. I've never considered myself to be stingy when working there. I know some people are, but I want the customer to be happy. However, there's a line between generous and reckless. Anyways, I gave him a good amount of chicken and steak. In fact, he nearly got a full serving of each. But then after I scooped them, he was like, "Come on, you can do better." I told him I'm not giving him any more without it being a double order. Then he said he would get a double order and told me to give the exact same amount of each again. By now, I was getting really annoyed. So we finally moved on to the other ingredients, and the man asked for extra of every other thing. Then he of course asked for several extra tortillas on the side and stuff. He also asked for guacamole, and even after I told him it was extra, he said yes. Then he asked for extra guac. By that point, the bowl was like overflowing and I could barely close it with the lid. When I was ringing him up, he suddenly freaked out and said that he was not paying extra for guac. He rambled about how it doesn't cost extra anymore, which was a total lie. He also claimed that he never asked for extra chicken or steak, which he did. He called for my manager, who came by and sided with me. She saw how full the bowl was and just how much meat was in there, and she knew that there was no way that was a single serving. The man said that he refused to pay. I told him that he could leave then. By now, I was really ticked off. The guy's whole personality just really made me mad. After arguing back and forth for a short time, he then took out his cell phone and started recording me. Then he started yelling really loud, getting the whole restaurant's attention that he was, quote, getting scammed, and he started saying that I should be fired. My manager and I just stared at him and let him make a fool of himself. Everyone else in the restaurant was just staring at him like he was a weirdo. Then, after he was done with his 30-second rant, he suddenly just grabbed the bowl and made a run for it. We let him because I wasn't going to chase after this guy and tackle him for a bowl of Chipotle. Then my manager called the police. We reported the whole incident and I was able to leave a while later. I'm not sure if the man was ever found or what, but not long after, I quit. That was by far the craziest thing that ever happened when I worked there. I live alone in a small house that I rent, and this happened just a few weeks ago. So, one night I was watching TV by myself in the living room. I was sitting on the couch and just having a relaxing night. For some context, the living room is at the front end of my house. My couch is against the large living room window which looks out to the front yard. So, as I sat on the couch, the window was directly behind me. It's a very long window that stretches across much of the room. There are curtains on each side that can be closed, but to be honest, I'm too lazy to close them most of the time. So when I go to bed, I just shut the lights off. So there I was, sitting on the living room couch and watching television. Out of nowhere, I heard a knocking coming from right behind me. Somebody was knocking on my window. It really startled me, and I quickly looked back. When I did, I saw this man standing there in the bushes. He was right on the other side of the glass, like 3 feet away from my head. The man was wearing a sweatshirt and a jacket as well. Both hoods were up far, covering most of his face. It was a kind of rainy night, but this still looked super suspicious. I really couldn't see the guy's face at all. Plus, it was really dark out there. The more suspicious thing, though, was that he was standing in my bushes and knocking on my living room window. My house was not super close to the street either. You would have to walk through the whole front yard to get to it. After seeing the guy, I got up from the couch quickly to put some distance between us. I moved back to the edge of the living room. However, the man did not move. The guy still stood there looking at me, but also sort of looking down kind of. He didn't wave or say anything. I kept watching him, and he kept seemingly watching me. After probably a minute or two, I yelled at him. I asked him what he was doing. At first, the guy did nothing. He didn't answer me. He didn't even really react. Then, he moved away from the window to the side, going out of my view. It did not appear as though he was going off my property, but just to another area of the house. I moved out of the living room to try to figure out where he went. He had gone in the direction of my bedroom, so I went there and looked out of the window, but I didn't see him. Then I went around my house looking out of every window. I didn't see the man anywhere. It was possible that he had left my property, and I was hoping that was the case. My front and backyards are not that big, but I do have some trees and bushes. Plus, there really isn't much lighting at all, so I couldn't really see. I went around looking out of the windows from all angles. I went into the kitchen to look into the backyard, and I still didn't see the guy. So I decided to go outside to look. I wasn't trying to hunt him down or anything. I just wanted to verify that he was off my property and the vicinity for my own peace of mind. So I went out the front door and then walked around my house looking. I didn't see the guy at all, and I felt fairly confident that he was gone by now. What that was all about, I didn't know, but I went back inside and tried to relax again before bed. It was pretty late by now, and I had been planning on going to bed pretty soon anyways. I was up in the living room for a little while longer, and nothing happened, so I went to bed. However, I found it very hard to get to sleep. I wasn't tired anymore, and I was feeling paranoid from the strange man at my window. I laid there in bed for probably 30 minutes trying to fall asleep. Then, as I was laying there, I heard the sound of somebody loudly trying to enter my back door. Thankfully, it was locked. I got up and I started turning on all the lights in my house. I also called the cops. Then I started looking out of all the windows. I didn't see anything. I'm guessing that it was the same guy, but he was gone now. When the police got there, I told them about what happened. I gave them a description and they said that they would look around. But after searching my property and the immediate area, they didn't locate him. He hasn't been back since, and I'm hoping that I never see that guy again. I had a terrifying experience once when I used to work at a bowling alley. I worked there when I was 19 years old for several months. This was many years ago now, but I still remember it very well. So I did a bit of everything around the place. We were not that large of a bowling alley, but had what you would expect. This story takes place one night when I was working, and the bowling alley was not too busy that evening. I was working until close, which on this particular night was 11 p.m. We had several people working early, but at the time of close, it was just me and one other person. So during the 10 o'clock hour, my coworker was in the back organizing things. There were just a couple people bowling, and by 10:30, they had all left. So at this point, I remained working behind the main counter near the entrance and in front of the lanes, and my coworker was behind me in the back. I remember that at about 10:45, I noticed a man walking into the bowling alley. It seemed a little bit strange, because we closed in just 15 minutes. Maybe he didn't know that we were closing soon, but he would not even have time to bowl one game. The guy was wearing a black jacket and a hat as well. I didn't really get a good look at his face, but after entering, the man did not even look at me or go up to my counter. He blew right past me and walked faster down near the lanes, as if he knew exactly where he was going. But he couldn't be meeting anybody here or anything. Nobody else was here. I was confused by it, but I also figured he would be gone very soon, because he obviously wasn't going to be bowling. He then went out of my sight, and I went into the back to speak with my coworker for a minute. When I came back, I looked around and did not see the man. I figured he had left. I stayed behind the counter until 11. Then I went to go lock the doors. But before doing so, I went all around the bowling alley, just making sure that the man had in fact left. He was not there, so I continued. After that, there were just a few things that I had to do before I could leave. One of those was to turn off all the bowling lanes, which you had to do behind them. This is something that I had done many times before. So I walked around to enter the small back area behind the lanes near where the pins are. As soon as I entered it, I instantly saw the man. It was the same guy who had recently entered the bowling alley. I did not know what he was doing back there. The guy looked right at me. I was so surprised about seeing him. At first, I didn't know what to say or do. After staring at each other for a few moments, I was about to tell the guy that he wasn't allowed to be back there. But before I could, he started to aggressively charge towards me. He was maybe 20 feet away, so I quickly moved back and out of the room. I got back out into the walkway next to the lanes. I did not hear the guy leaving, but I ran all the way to the back room where my coworker was. I closed the door and told him about the guy back there. We both decided to call the police. Then we waited where we were in the back. We did not hear anything from the rest of the bowling alley and didn't dare leave the back room. When the cops got there, they searched the entire place, but the man was gone. He must have left sometime while we waited. After that, my coworkers and I were able to finish closing up and leave. One cold evening, just before dusk, I was driving home from work on a quiet stretch of country road. My car was in good shape, but the road that I was on was very poorly lit and was not traveled very much by most people. That's when I noticed the headlights of a car ahead stopped on the side of the road. As I approached, I saw that the car had its hazard lights blinking. From the looks of it, it had been there for a while, so I pulled over to make sure everything was okay and to see if they needed any help. A man was standing next to the car, pacing back and forth. When I rolled down my window, he came up to me. His clothes were a bit shabby, and he looked like he hadn't slept in a while. He said something like, "Hey, thanks for stopping. My car just died, and I don't have a phone. Can you help me out?" I agreed to take a look, and we both went over to his car. The hood was already up, but the engine was cold. I wasn't a mechanic, but I could check the basic things. There were no visible issues with the engine or the oil. The man seemed anxious, glancing around the darkening woods that bordered the road. I told him that I could call for a tow truck as I reached for my phone, but he told me not to bother and that he already had called one and it was on its way. I told the man I could keep him company and made some small talk about if he lived nearby or was from the area. The only thing he really gave me was that he didn't live too far away. He wasn't really in the mood for small talk, and I didn't really blame him as it seemed like he was having a bad day with the whole car issues. I turned back towards my car to grab a flashlight, Windex, and the roll of paper towels I kept in my car. I figured as long as I was waiting with this guy and he was not in the mood to talk, I may as well go ahead and clean my windshield. I grabbed the items from the trunk of my car and came around to the front of my car to discover that the man was now gone. I walked over to his car to see if he had decided to lie down inside or something, but he was nowhere to be seen. I couldn't believe it. He had just vanished. Shining my flashlight around the side of the road and into the woods nearby, I saw nothing, no trace of the man who had just been there. I got back into my car, uneasy about what had just happened. The car remained on the side of the road, empty and abandoned. I called the tow service, telling them about the situation, and they assured me they would send someone out as soon as possible. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort. It didn't make sense why he would leave his car like that, especially when it was so close to being fixed. A few days later, I heard on the local news about a missing person report of a man who matched the description of the one I had been trying to help. The authorities searched the area, but no trace of him was found. The man's car had been found, still abandoned on the roadside, but with no sign of the man's belongings or any clues as to where he might have gone. To this day, I wonder what happened that night. He had to have run into the woods for who knows what reason and gotten lost, or maybe something else happened to him there. I have no idea. It was by far the strangest encounter I've ever had in my life. When I was younger, I would go on many cycling trips. The year after I graduated college, I embarked on a long-distance cycling trip across Australia. I'd cycled through many places and had some strange experiences, but one night stands out in my memory from when I was in Australia. I had been riding for weeks in Western and Southern Australia. Most of my journey was uneventful, filled with the sounds of nature and the rhythm of my bike tires against the dirt roads. On this particular evening, I found myself cycling alongside a pipeline that hugged the highway. As dusk approached, I decided to find a quiet spot to camp. I veered off the dirt road, moving inland. The deeper I went, the more I felt I was leaving civilization behind. I stumbled upon what looked like a small forest, with overgrown ruins peeking through the trees. Stone walls were jutted out from the ground, remnants of houses that had been there long ago. It felt eerie, but also interesting, as if nature had taken the land back from the past. I decided this was a nice spot, so I stopped and set up my tent, ensuring that the area was clear of brush and debris. After a simple pasta dinner, I snuffed out the fire and crawled into my tent. By then, it was around 8 p.m., and darkness had enveloped the forest quickly. I had grown accustomed to camping alone, and nights spent outdoors were nothing new to me. But that night was different. The first thing I noticed was an unsettling silence. Normally, the forest is full of sounds, whether they're comforting or intimidating, but it was dead silent. I lay in my sleeping bag, straining to hear any sound such as crickets, animals, or anything, but there was nothing. Eventually, I heard loud and deliberate footsteps though. I speculated that it was a person. I couldn't think of an animal that made such a distinct walking sound that I knew of. I held my breath, hoping whatever it was wouldn't notice my presence. The intervals between the steps were oddly spaced, like someone was taking their time. I debated between grabbing my torch and confronting whatever was out there, or just sitting in silence. Moments dragged on, filled only by those ominous steps circling my tent. The footsteps continued for most of the night, sometimes fading into the distance, only to circle back. I must have sat there for what felt like hours, gripping my shovel tightly in case I needed to use it. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, the sun was peeking through the trees, casting light into the tent. Outside, the forest was alive now with sounds I had missed earlier that night, such as birds chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. I quickly scanned the area for any signs of what happened during the night, but there was nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, no indication that something had circled my tent. It was as if the forest had returned to its natural state, erasing any evidence of the previous night's terror. I hurriedly packed up my gear, shaken but relieved to be moving again. As I cycled back towards the pipeline and the highway, I couldn't shake off the strange feeling of whatever had happened the night before, certain that it wasn't just my imagination. I'm a gym teacher and have been for almost 7 years. Back a couple of years ago now, something really crazy happened. So I was teaching several different gym classes, 2 electives and 2 basic required gym classes. The basic ones would be for everyone in the school. We would do basic physical tests and activities as well as some written tests. It was a pretty easy class to get an A in. I remember that on this semester in particular, there was a kid in one of my classes who would rarely show up. He was a student who got very poor grades overall and didn't really seem to try much. He would sometimes only show up once or twice a week. You never really knew if he would be there or not. Then he would randomly show up for a whole week, and his absences were never excused, so his grade in the class plummeted. Probably the largest part of grades for my classes are attendance, which means literally all you have to do is show up and you'll probably pass. I remember that at one point, about midway through the semester, I took him aside and I told him that he really needed to show up more. I tried to make it clear how easy it was to pass the class if he just showed up, but if he kept on the track that he was on, he would probably fail. He pretty much gave me a tough guy routine like he didn't really care and waved me off. Kids are stubborn and sometimes don't understand or care about things like that. At least I tried though. Overall, he showed up on and off for about another week or 2. Then he stopped showing up entirely. He was gone for literally the rest of the semester and I had to fail him. So, during this time, I lived by myself in a small house that I was renting. A few weeks later, I was home one night. I don't remember the exact time, but it was probably like 10 p.m. or so. I just remember that out of nowhere, I heard the handle to my back door start moving, as if somebody was trying to open it. Instantly, it gave me a terrible feeling, because that was not something that had ever happened before. After the door didn't open, I sort of heard the sound of somebody walking near it. I decided to go over and look. Most of the lights in my house were off at this point, so I carefully made my way to the back. When I got near the back door, I went over to a window. Most of the windows were covered, but when I looked through the blinds, I could see outside. At first, I saw nothing. Then I went over to the back door and I looked out of the window on it. When I looked to the right, that's when I saw what looked like the student from my class, the one who rarely showed up that I talked about. He was by himself and now facing another window that led to the kitchen. It looked like he was going to try to break in or something. I took out my phone and I dialed 911. Then I turned the backyard light on. When I turned it on, I just barely saw the kid stop and then look around. Then he seemed to notice me looking out the window at him. He turned and ran, taking off back around the house and towards the street. I still went through with the call to the police and I reported him. I knew his name and gave his information to the cops. He ended up being caught and admitted that he was going to try to break into my house. He said that he just wanted some drug money and that was all. Why he chose me though, I'm not sure. I thought that maybe it was because he was mad at me for failing him or something, but I'm also guessing that I'm not the only teacher that failed him. I mean, he never showed up to school, so he probably failed all his classes, and I don't think he even cared. Maybe he was going to try to rob all his teachers. I really don't know. I also don't know how he knew where I lived. Did he follow me home? Some of those things remain a mystery, but I never had any more problems with him. He was expelled from the school, and I never saw him again. I live in an apartment complex that's fairly new, and it's located pretty close to a few businesses. Many nights I go on walks when the weather is good, because there's a sidewalk that goes around my apartment complex. It also goes past several of the businesses and along a few streets as well. It's a nice and easy route to walk, and I prefer that over going on a treadmill. So one night I went for a walk a little bit later than usual at around 9 p.m. It was a nice night though, and the weather was good. I had worked late and wanted to get some fresh air and exercise, so I started walking, and basically the route that I took went past the apartment complex. Then I would cross the street, go past a few businesses, and then turn at the corner and walk another way that went back around the complex. It was a loop that would take about 15 minutes to walk, and I would usually walk 2 or 3 laps of it. On this night, things were very quiet with it being a little bit later. Sometimes other people would be out walking their dogs, but I didn't see anyone. So I made it past the apartment complex and I was walking past some businesses. One of those was a Chipotle. I remember looking over as I went past and I saw this man walking out of it. He seemed to look over at me, but he was really far away, well over 100 feet. I just looked away and kept walking. I continued with my walk and eventually turned and went along the street. I made it back around to my apartment a while later and then decided to walk another lap, maybe two. So I continued on and eventually I was walking past the Chipotle again. When I did, I noticed that the man who I had seen was still there. This was pretty strange. It was like 15 or 20 minutes later, but the guy looked like he had barely moved 5 feet. He was just standing around next to the building and appeared to be looking right at me. I looked at him for a moment and then continued. The man then seemed to start walking in my direction. I just kept going and didn't look back at him. I reached the corner and turned where I usually did, and then started walking along the street. It wasn't until about 5 minutes later that I looked behind me. When I did, I noticed that the man was there walking a pretty far ways back. I found this odd, but I wasn't nervous or anything yet. I kept going, and after turning another corner, I looked behind me once again. After a short time, I saw the man come around the corner. He was still walking behind me. I told myself that it was just a coincidence, and at that point, it very well could have been. I didn't look behind me for a long time, not until I got to my apartment again where I would start and end the walks. There I glanced back, and the man was still there, but still a long ways behind me. I had been planning on doing another lap. I had a sort of bad feeling, like maybe the man was following me. Still, I told myself that I was just being paranoid, and I kept going. So I continued walking, and when I got towards the Chipotle again, the man was still behind me, except now he looked closer than before. Now I knew this was not a coincidence. Why would he leave the Chipotle just to walk around and then go back to it? I started walking faster and told myself not to look back. About 10 minutes later, when I was by the street, I couldn't help myself and I looked. The man was still there and even closer to me than before, even after I had started walking faster. Now I was regretting doing another lap and I just wanted to get back to my apartment. As I kept walking, I could sense that the guy was getting closer and closer. I continued at my fast pace. I turned at the corner before my apartment and I was nearly running. I didn't look back or anything. Finally, I reached my apartment building. It was not the main door to the place, but a side one. I went inside quickly and made sure that the door shut and locked. Then I started going up the stairs, which were right there. When I got to the second floor, I looked out of the window in the stairwell. I saw the man standing there and trying to open the door, but he couldn't get in, so clearly he didn't live there. When I was looking at him, he looked up and noticed me, and then he started knocking on the door. I ignored it and quickly moved away from the window and went to my apartment. After that, I made sure not to walk at night for a while. I'm not sure what that man wanted or who he was, but it's very strange. I was at a bowling alley several months ago and had one of the craziest experiences of my life. I went there with 3 friends. It was 4 of us bowling and the place was somewhat busy, but nothing crazy. I'm alright at bowling, and I'm sort of particular about the bowling ball that I use. This was my first time at this particular bowling alley. I first used this one bowling ball, but I didn't really like the feel of it, so I went to one of the nearby racks that had balls, and I found one that was really good. It was this green ball, and when I started using it, it just felt great. So my friends and I continued bowling, and after our first game, we decided to do another one. Now this game was going really well for me, and I was winning with one of my better scores of all time to that point. Right smack in the middle of the game, I remember this man approached us. I had not seen him before and didn't know where he had come from. The man was somewhat short and a little thin, but had longer hair and a mustache. After approaching me, he told me that I was using his ball. Then he pointed to the green ball. He said he saw me using it, but he needed to take it back now. I asked him if he actually owned the ball. He said no, but he used it every time he came to this bowling alley. He claimed that he couldn't bowl without it. The man's overall way of talking and behavior came off as rude to me. In my opinion, I already had the ball, and I didn't need to just give it up to him right in the middle of my game because he wanted it. I said no, but he could have it when I was done. The man then said that he needed it now. He tried walking closer to just take it. I stepped in front of him, and he actually pushed me to the side a little. I was shocked. and then watched the man take the ball and walk away. I was angry and wanted badly to grab him and punch him in the face, but obviously I thought better of it and I did nothing. I watched him go back to his lane and then start bowling with the ball. And this guy was not bowling in some serious league, but just appeared to be bowling with friends like I was. I found another ball that wasn't nearly as good, and in between my bowls, I was kind of looking over at the man a lot. I remember I noticed him just standing around a lot between his turns. His whole friend group really seemed to be taking their time. I looked around all the other racks of balls to find one that I liked, but there were none. At one point, the man kind of walked away from the lanes. So when he did, I walked right back over, took the ball, and brought it back to my lane. Then I continued to use it. I mean, the guy had taken my ball right in the middle of one of the best games of my life. For about 10 more minutes, I had it. Then, out of nowhere, the man suddenly walked over again and took the ball back. But instead of going back to his lane, I watched him walk right out of the doors of the bowling alley. I had no idea what that was all about. I guessed he was stealing the ball. I ended up just getting another ball and finishing bowling with that one. And by the way, I did not bowl nearly as good with that ball, and my great game was ruined. So after we were done bowling, we went to leave. When I made it out to the parking lot, I noticed that my windshield was all cracked. I realized what had happened. The man had more than likely taken the bowling ball and smashed my windshield with it. I called the police and reported it, as well as told the bowling alley. After an investigation, security camera footage did in fact show the man breaking my windshield. I'm not sure how he knew that car was mine, but he did. The man was later tracked down and apprehended, but this remains one of the craziest things that's ever happened to me. I used to work at Amazon for a while. I worked in the warehouse, and I would do things like pack orders and receive inventory, among other things. The coworkers that I worked with were mostly cool. I didn't have a problem with any of them, until that all changed. So I remember that I had this one coworker named Mark. I never really talked to him that much. Overall, he seemed fine, and just like everyone else. So one night, I got off of work and left. I drove home, which would take about 15 minutes. Nothing out of the ordinary happened until I was almost back. The roads had been pretty quiet because of it being a little bit later. However, I did not notice anything strange. After I got to the parking lot of my apartment, I got out of my car. I recall noticing a car pulling into the other side of the parking lot, but I didn't really think much of it. It's a fairly large apartment complex with quite a few people who live there, and the parking lot is pretty big too. The car parked on the far opposite end. Then I walked towards the building and then went inside. After that, I walked down the hallway and went up the stairs to my floor. My apartment building was not the nicest and sort of run down. When I got up to my floor, I walked to my room. However, as I was doing this, I heard the door to the stairs opening behind me. I still thought nothing of it. It was a ways back and I couldn't see the person in my view at that point. After unlocking my door, I heard footsteps in the hallway, but I didn't look. Then I went inside, closed the door behind me, and locked it like I always did. Now, not even 10 seconds after I had locked the door, somebody tried opening it. I was still standing nearby, and it really surprised me. I stepped over and looked through the peephole. When I did, I saw Mark from work at Amazon standing there. I was surprised to say the least. I didn't know what on earth he was doing there. For a moment, I was thinking about opening the door, but I decided not to. Then Mark walked away out of sight. At that point, I did open the door. He was a ways away now, and as he was still walking away, after I looked outside and he heard the door open, he turned back. I called out his name, and I was starting to ask him what he was doing here. As soon as he saw me though, he just turned and ran. He sprinted down the rest of the hallway and out of my sight. It was really weird. The next day when I got to work, I asked if Mark was there, and I was told no. I told my supervisor about what had happened, and he said that he was going to talk to Mark. However, Mark never showed up. He must have quit the job, because I never saw him again after that. I only worked there a few more months. I also do not live in that same apartment anymore. Looking back, I realized that Mark must have followed me home without me noticing. I'm not really sure how I didn't notice, but I just didn't. I think he got in the building because people were always propping the doors open with stuff, and I'm not even sure if some of the doors locked properly or closed properly. It was kind of a rundown place, and I'm glad I don't live there anymore. It was a very creepy experience, and I'm really glad that I locked my apartment door when I did. I don't know what could have happened if not. This happened back when I was in college. I was a freshman and living in the freshman dorms. It was a large dorm building and my floor was all female. I had my own dorm room, which was very nice because I didn't have to share it with a roommate. Other than the little bit of extra space though, it was a pretty typical college dorm room. The university that I went to was large and I quickly made a good number of friends. It became a normal routine for me to spend time with my new college friends quite a bit. We would do homework and study together and hang out on the weekends. Sometimes I would go to parties with them or sports games and things like that. One weekend, I was with my friends until really late at night. I hadn't even been drinking, but I stayed out until like 2 a.m. I got back to my dorm room and was so tired that I pretty much went right to sleep. And in doing so, I forgot to lock the door to my room. The next thing that I knew, I was waking up sometime later in the night. When I awoke, I saw that it was still completely dark out. But the very next instant, I heard that my door was opening. That brought in a little bit of light, and I saw what appeared to be a man standing in the doorway. He appeared to be looking at me, but in the lighting I only really saw a silhouette mostly. But even with what little I could see, the man did not appear to be a college guy, and certainly not anybody that I knew. I kept watching, wondering what was going on. He didn't say anything, but just stood in the doorway looking at me for at least a minute. Then the man opened the door even more and was completely inside my room. He slowly and quickly closed the door behind him. At this point, I was really creeped out. When he was closing the door though, I got a good enough look at him to see that he was way older than most college students. He was at least in his 40s, probably his 50s if I had to guess. The man stood in the doorway for a little while. I was sort of pretending to be asleep, opening my eyes a tiny bit. The room was so dark though that it was hard to see anything, and now that the door was closed, it was even more difficult to see. The man then moved so that he was sort of out of my sight, going behind the end of my bed. I knew that I had to do something. I quickly sat up and reached for the drawer of my nightstand that was next to me. My dad had bought me some pepper spray and gave it to me for protection at college. I had never actually taken it out with me because I didn't think that I would ever need it, so I just put it in my drawer. But now, I was really glad that my dad had got it for me. After I got up, the man heard me and he moved out from where he was. He did not leave my room though. Instead, he started walking closer to me. In the dark, I was desperately fumbling around the drawer through all the junk trying to find the pepper spray. Thankfully, it was open because of course my dad had demonstrated to me how to use it. I finally found it and the man was now just feet away from me. He didn't say anything. He was just walking right towards me kind of slow. I pointed the pepper spray at him, but I don't know if he even saw it with how dark it was. Then I just started spraying. At first, I didn't know if it did anything because the man didn't run away. In fact, he got even closer. He reached out and almost grabbed it out of my hands. Then I started yelling really loud. I kept spraying, and some of it got in the air towards my face, and it definitely worked. When I kept spraying, it started to affect the guy more. I was yelling as loud as I could and spraying pepper spray everywhere. The combination caused the man to finally leave. He quickly ran away and out the door, then he left. I went over and locked the door, and for a few minutes I was too shocked to do anything. It all happened so fast, and I was shaking from the experience. Soon there was a knock on my door. I didn't want to answer it and was still holding the pepper spray. Then I heard a voice say, "Campus safety." Only then did I go over and look through the door. I saw that it was in fact a campus safety officer. I answered and he said that there was reports of loud yelling and wanted to know if everything was okay. I told him what happened and he ended up contacting the police. There was a search for the guy, but he was not found. I still don't know who he was. That was the only time anything like that happened to me in my time at college. I'm really glad that my dad got me that pepper spray. This happened when I was younger. I was probably about 12 or 13 when this event took place. We lived a little bit out in the country. There was a nice and quiet neighborhood that my family lived in, and I enjoyed it. There was a group of neighborhood kids who I would hang out with, especially in the summertime. We would all hang out and play sports and stuff in this one field near our houses. The field was next to the road leading into our neighborhood, and I have no clue who actually owned the land. There were no houses that close to it, and it was pretty open. Running alongside the field were these old train tracks that curved away at the end of the field, and also at the end of it was a large woods. On the other side of that woods were more houses. The train tracks and road were both typically very quiet. So one evening, a group of us kids were out there playing kickball. It started with probably 7 or 8 of us, but as it got later and dark out, it went down to 4 of us still out there. We continued to play outside, and it was soon completely dark. I figured that I should head back home pretty soon, but we were having a fun time. That's when we heard a train approaching. The tracks were pretty far from where we were, so we were not in any kind of danger or anything. It was very unusual for a train to come through though. It would only seem to happen once every couple of months if I remember correctly. So the train started going by pretty slowly, and all of us stopped and watched it. It went right past the field, and then it started to go around the corner through the woods. There were quite a few train cars on it, and it continued to go, but it got slower. I remember that we finally saw the end, but on one of the last train cars, we saw something else. This was not a train with passengers, but the kind that probably just had materials or whatever on it. But one of the last cars had a door on it that was open, and we saw this guy standing there looking out of it. He looked at us as it went past, and I just stared at him, surprised at the sight. But the train kept going slower and slower. When the caboose almost got into the woods and the man was just barely in our sight still, the train stopped completely. We were still just watching it. After it stopped for like 10 seconds, the man hopped off the train. He was really far away, but we all saw him. The guy was kind of heading towards the woods. I remember thinking that I wanted to go home at that point. We decided to wrap up our game of kickball. Instead of just leaving though, we decided to all get one more kick each. So I was the first one to kick, and the other guys were out in the field. After I kicked, I went out into the field. When the last friend was kicking before we left, he kicked it really far over all our heads. I was the farthest back, and I went running after it. The ball did not make it to the woods, but maybe within 20 feet of it. I remember that as I was grabbing the ball, I heard some leaves rustling in the woods. I picked up the ball and then just sprinted back over to my friends. When I got back, I turned around to look. I saw the man emerging from the woods. He was walking through the field now in our direction. The guy had long hair and a beard. None of us recognized him, but we all just took off running. We went out of the field, down the road, and back into our neighborhood. Then we scattered, each going to our separate houses. We were all able to make it back safely. I don't think the guy even chased after us, but that was a terrifying moment. I don't know why the guy was on the train or why he jumped off of it. I also don't know why he came out of the woods towards us. I tried not to stay out after dark after that though. I love riding my bike at night. I would often go for night rides on this trail near my house. I had been on this trail many times and never saw anything strange until this one night. As I was riding, the beam from my bike light sliced through the shadows, illuminating the narrow path ahead. I was biking fast, and as I rounded a bend, something caught my eye. Off to the right of the path, just beyond the tree line, stood a figure. Since I was going pretty fast, it was only visible in my headlight for a split second, but it was a person, their outline barely visible in the darkness. They seemed to just be standing there, motionless. I flew by and questioned if my eyes were playing tricks on me and if I had really seen someone just standing there in the woods. I was a little bit nervous because the trail I was on was just one big loop, with the entrance and exit being the same path. So on my way back out, I would pass by that spot again. As I finished the loop and got back onto the path where I had seen the figure, I was nervous about seeing it again. I didn't even want to see it, and I kept my eyes on the path right in front of me, not daring to look out into the woods when I approached the spot. But I couldn't avoid seeing it this time. In the middle of the trail stood the same figure. This time I could make out a bit more detail. It looked like a man, though it was hard to tell in the dark. He stood there, legs apart, blocking my path. I slowed down, unsure of what to do, but this was the only way out. I had to pass him. I yelled at him to get out of my way, but there was no response. I pushed down on the pedals, hoping to dart past him somehow, but as I got closer, he suddenly lunged towards me. My heart sank as I realized he was trying to push me off my bike. I swerved to the left, almost hitting the trees on the left side of the path. As he tried to grab me or knock me off, I kicked my right leg into him, trying to kick him and push him back away from my bike. I don't know if it was his shoulder or arm, but part of his body made contact with my upper body as he tried to shove me off the trail and off my bike. I'm not even sure how, maybe just crazy adrenaline, but I had managed to stay upright on my bike through all this and not hit the trees on my left as I squeezed past him. I pedaled hard, pumping my legs as fast as I could all the way back home. That night, I warned the authorities about the guy on the path and hoped that maybe he would still be there when they arrived, but I doubted it. I'm not sure if he was trying to mug me or maybe he wanted to steal my bike, but either way, he was crazy enough to try to attack me on foot while I was biking. I still bike that trail all the time, but I always have a firearm with me now just in case. I was driving home late one night, taking the back roads to avoid the interstate traffic. The road was narrow and lined with dense woods, just a common quiet backwoods road. It was around midnight when I felt the sudden jolt. My truck swerved slightly before I managed to pull over. I got out and I saw that one of the rear tires was completely flat. Thankfully, I had a spare in the back, so I had to change the tire and then I would be back on the road. As I was working, I started to hear a sound from the woods. It was a steady, rhythmic thumping, like somebody was tapping a drum. At first, I tried to ignore it, focusing on the task at hand of changing my tire. But the thumping continued, and it seemed to get louder. It wasn't just the thumping anymore. I also heard faint whispers that I could barely make out. I stood up and looked around, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness beyond the reach of my headlights. The sound of the whispers and the thumping was very unnerving. I finished changing my tire as quickly as I could so that I could get back onto the road. Just as I was about to lower the truck back to the ground, I heard a new noise. It was a low growl coming from the edge of the forest, unlike any animal noise that I had heard before. My heart started to race. I glanced around trying to spot anything moving in the dark, but I saw nothing. The growl came again, closer this time, and it was accompanied by a series of sharp snaps, like twigs breaking. I hurried to finish up, and my hands were shaking. The growling and the snapping sounds seemed to be getting closer. I was terrified now, and I didn't want to stay there any longer. As I packed up my tools and prepared to get back in the truck, the growl stopped abruptly and was replaced by deafening silence. The whispers had also stopped. I was just about to get into the truck when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. The only thing I could make out was a shadow moving between the trees. It was quick and seemed to dart from one tree to another. I tried to make out what it was, but the darkness made it impossible. I jumped into the truck, slammed the door shut, and started the engine. My hands were trembling as I put the truck in gear and drove away, speeding out of there trying to get away from whatever was back there. I was able to make it home, but I still think about that and wonder what exactly happened and what those noises were. This is a crazy experience that I had while I was visiting New York a few years ago. I went to New York City, and this was my second time being there. Obviously, there's a lot of things to do and see there. I didn't have a car with me, so I would be either walking or taking the subway to travel places, and I was traveling by myself, which I really didn't mind. But one night, I was going home after lots of sightseeing in one part of the city. I was taking the subway back to my hotel. So I got on and sat down, and after a few stops, I remember this one guy got on and sat next to me. He was a sort of big guy, probably in his 40s, with light brown hair. The subway was pretty crowded, so it wasn't weird or anything of him to sit next to me. I remember that he started a conversation with me, and he seemed like a pretty friendly guy. He was talking about the city and said that he lived and worked there. He asked me a few things about myself as well. So we talked on and off for probably 10 or 15 minutes. Then it was my stop, and I said bye to the man and got up and left the subway. I walked out and up to the sidewalk, and then was just a couple of blocks from my hotel. But after getting onto the sidewalk, I remember realizing that I didn't have my wallet. I always kept my wallet in my right pocket, and I realized that there was nothing there. I felt around all my pockets, and it definitely was not in any of them. I started looking around the sidewalks, but I didn't see anything. I realized that I must have left it on the subway. I never took it out of my pocket, but possibly it had fallen out, or else the guy that was sitting next to me could have stole it from me, and he was sitting just to my right and pretty close to me. I wanted to go back on the subway, but it was long gone now. I was really angry because I had all my credit cards and stuff in there. Plus, I had over $100 in cash. I figured I had better put a freeze on my cards, so I walked up to my hotel and went in my room. Then I went online and turned off all my credit cards, which luckily hadn't been used yet. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do because I had to go back in 2 days and I didn't have my license or anything now. After doing research online and talking to a few friends for probably almost an hour, there was suddenly a knock at my hotel room door. I got up and walked over to the door. I looked through the peephole, but nobody was there, so I opened it up and looked around. I still saw no one, but then I looked down and saw my wallet right there on the floor in front of my door. I couldn't believe my eyes. I picked it up and took it in the room. My license as well as all my credit cards were still there. However, all the cash was gone, which did not really surprise me. I was mostly just happy to get it back. I didn't know how anybody would know to give it to me though. I figured maybe it was the guy that I sat next to. So I left my room and went down to the front desk. I asked them if they had brought my wallet up to me, but they said no. This shocked me. I was sure that somebody who worked at the hotel had brought it up, because how else would they know where my room was? The only other explanation that I could think of was if the man that was sitting next to me brought it up himself. But how would he know which room was mine? I talked to several hotel staff, and they all denied knowing about my wallet or bringing it to my room. It's still a mystery to me to this day. I think maybe the guy followed me, but I'm not sure. I found out later that night that somebody had tried to use my credit card at an ATM around the corner shortly before it was at my door, but it declined. I'm glad that I disabled my cards when I did. This is a story of something that happened many years ago when I was in high school. It still gives me the creeps when I think about it to this day. So I was a senior and I was in one of my gym classes one day. It was an elective class that was really easy. We would pretty much just play sports all the time and things like that. One time we went outside to play soccer in the fields behind the school. There were tons of fields back there, most of which were used for football practices and soccer practices. So the gym teacher was the referee for the soccer game, and I remember that not everyone in the class was playing at once. I started out playing, but then I came out and I was standing on the sidelines with some other students. I was on the side of the field that was farthest away from the school. Behind me, only about 20 feet away, was the start of a large woods that was behind the school. I was standing sort of by myself and kind of on the end, just watching the soccer game. Then I heard a voice behind me. I looked back and I saw that there was this man just standing inside of the woods. I didn't know who he was and had never seen him before. The man looked like he was in his 50s or so. I was confused as to what he was doing in the woods. After getting my attention, the man started waving me over to him. I did not want to go over there though, obviously. I looked around thinking maybe the man was not talking to me, but no, it was definitely me. The guy was still trying to get me to go into the woods. I went over to the student that was next closest to me on the sideline to show her the guy. When I got over there though, the man was gone. He went back into the woods, I guess. I was really confused about the whole thing. Sometime later though, I went back in the game. When I was on the soccer field playing, I didn't really think about the guy and I forgot to mention it to the teacher. Plus, he was busy being the referee. So the next time that I went back out of the game and was on the sideline, I heard the guy in the woods again. He once more got my attention, and when I turned to look back towards the woods, he was in the same spot waving me over again. I loudly said, "Who is this guy?" When I did, the man jumped back into the woods, disappearing. Some of the other kids on the sidelines looked over, but he was gone. I told some other kids about the man in the woods. I kept a watch on the area for the rest of the time that I was on the bench in that game, and some of the other kids looked over as well, but the man did not come back. I figured that he was finally gone for good this time. I didn't really know what that was all about, but I didn't really think it was that big of a deal. I didn't see the man for the rest of that class period either. After that, we went back inside the school. Well, about an hour later when I was in another class, the school went into a lockdown. It lasted for about 30 minutes, maybe even 45 minutes. When it was over, I heard that it was for a suspicious man on the school premises. I realized it was probably that same guy. I don't know what he was doing, but I'm glad that he was gone. I'm really glad that I didn't go over to him when he was in the woods. I'm a high school gym teacher. It's a job that I really like because I played sports in high school and college as well. I'm a pretty active person, so it's fun to help the younger people become more active and stuff. Anyways, one of the other reasons I like being a gym teacher is because I generally don't have to grade that much stuff. I would not enjoy teaching another subject where I would have to be grading papers constantly. But for gym class, there are only a few points in the semester where I do have to grade. Each class is required at our school to have a written final test, and some are required to have midterms as well. So, on the day of this story, we had just taken finals. Our tests were not just on the Scantron or online though. There was a good amount of writing parts that students had to do, so that meant I would have to read each one of them and grade them. I figured that I would get it done that night, and I told myself I was not leaving until it was finished. Now, I had 4 classes to grade and about 100 tests total. I began grading right when school ended at about 3 o'clock. I continued on, taking only short breaks a couple of times. When I was finally done, it was almost 10 o'clock at night. Now, by that point, I'm pretty sure that I was the only person left at the school besides the overnight janitors. I packed up my things and then left the school to walk to my car in the parking lot. The teachers would park in the east lot, which was sort of in the back and next to a heavily wooded area. I would always park sort of in the back corner. That's where my spot was. Now, when I walked out there, immediately I saw these 2 guys kind of standing around. They were much too old to be students, but I didn't recognize them. They also did not work at the school. They were near my car sort of, and just standing under one of the few lights that was in the parking lot. It looked really sketchy right away, but I didn't want to back down. I continued walking to my car, and I noticed the 2 men just stare at me with their hands in their pockets. I had the instinctive urge to run away, but I fought it. I kept walking, and when I got about halfway to my car, I realized that the men were not going to move. They were going to stay right by my car, and there was no other cars in sight. So I decided to say something. I said, "Fellas, what's going on tonight?" None of the men said anything back to me. They just kept looking at me as they sort of paced around. As I got even closer, I saw both of them start to walk right in my direction. Now, to me, this seemed like they wanted some trouble. I'm not a violent person, but I would like to think I can take a guy in a fight. 2, on the other hand, is a different story. These guys had their hands in their pockets, so they very well might have had weapons on them too. And because of that, I made probably a stupid decision. I realized that they were both going towards me, and I finally listened to my instincts. I turned around and just took off running in the opposite direction. Thankfully, they didn't take out a gun and shoot me or anything, but they did start to chase after me. For what reason, I don't know. Being a gym teacher, I'm pretty fit and can run pretty fast. In fact, I was a sprinter in high school, so I used my speed to take off back towards the school. The man raced after me, but I was able to pull away with my speed. I kept going and did not stop until I was on the complete opposite end of the school. Then I took out my phone and dialed 911. I looked around and no longer saw the guys. I walked down the sidewalk until I saw police cars approaching about 5 minutes later, and I flagged them down. Then we went back to the parking lot where the men were. When we arrived though, they were gone. I spoke with the officers and then made a report. Then I was able to drive home. After that, I never saw or heard anything more from the men or about the incident. Thankfully, I haven't walked out to my car that late at night again either. I used to live in a major city and would ride the subway all the time. I didn't really mind it too much, but I have a car now and live outside the city, and I like it much better. But back to when I would ride the subway, I had this one really strange experience. So one night I was riding back rather late. It was probably close to midnight, and I was tired and on my way home. There were a few people on the subway as well, including somebody sitting a little to my left and someone across from me. There was another guy sort of across from me, but a ways down to my right. I remember that sometime on the ride, the guy across from me and a little ways to the right took out this camera. He started seemingly taking pictures of me. At first, I did not think that he was taking pictures of me, but maybe the guy sitting next to me. But as I looked over at him and he kept going, it sure seemed like he was directly pointing the camera at me specifically. I had no idea why he would be doing this. It seemed pretty strange. I didn't confront him though, and instead just ignored it. I looked down and went on my phone. However, a couple more times during the ride I looked up, and he was still taking pictures of me. Soon though, it was my stop. I was glad to get off the subway and away from this guy, but when I left the subway, he did too. I had a bad feeling when I saw him leaving, still holding the camera. As I walked away, I glanced back and saw him still pointing the camera at me to take another picture. This was kind of annoying to me now. I walked out of the subway and left, and was now going down the street. I thought for a moment that the guy had gone in another direction, but I was wrong. I looked around and soon saw him still taking pictures of me. After walking a little ways down with the man still there, I stopped and decided to confront him. When I turned around, he was still pointing the camera at me. I took a couple of steps toward him and started to ask him what he was doing. When I did though, he just turned around and bolted. He ran extremely fast off in the other direction, and I saw him go completely out of my sight. It was really strange, but I was glad that he was gone. So at that point, I just walked the rest of the way back home to my apartment. I got back and went inside. Well, I remember that maybe an hour after getting home, I randomly looked out of my window. I had a window that looked out to the street, and there was a sidewalk below me. I would look outside all the time because it was a cool view of the city like that. I was on the 3rd floor, and I saw the guy with the camera. He was standing out on the sidewalk, looking up at me. He still had his camera and then pointed it at me when I saw him. As soon as I noticed him though, I went away from the window and then covered it with the shades. I couldn't believe how he had somehow found me. He had gone so far away from me that I didn't think he'd have time to catch up or know my route, and I hadn't noticed him following me, but it made me worried that he already knew where I lived or had followed me before or something. I looked out a while later and he was gone, and after that, I never saw him again. I still don't know how he found me though. It was the craziest thing.